Welcome to this full NestJS authentication course, where we're going to learn NestJS by building a real-world production-ready authentication system. We're not just building login and register endpoints, we're going to cover the actual core concepts of NestJS. So those are modules, controllers, services, guards, dependency injection, custom decorators, pipes, and exception filters, all inside a real application. We're going to start by designing our database with Drizzle ORM and Neon Postgres. Then we're going to build the registration with email verification, login, JWT authentication, refresh tokens, forgot password, reset passwords, and secure HTTP-only cookie authentication. We're also going to build decorators, so custom decorators like at public, at rows, and at current user. Then we're going to connect everything together using global JWT and roles guards, so you truly understand how NestJS works under the hood. By the end of this tutorial, you would have a complete authentication system with 14 working endpoints that are tested live with Swagger and connected to a real PostgreSQL database. So if you truly want to learn how NestJS works under the hood while building a real production-ready application, let's dive in. And if you're looking for a developer to build your SaaS, your startup or mobile application, AI application, or full stack application, don't forget to check out my Upwork. The link is in the description below. I'm a 5-star rated freelance software developer helping clients to build modern production-ready applications using React Native, Next.js, Supabase, Node.js, and AI integrations. I want to start by installing the NestJS CLI globally on our machine. And we can do that by running npm install -g to install globally. And then we say at nestjs/CLI. Now at nestjs/CLI is the official NestJS command line tool, and installing it globally means we can run the NestJS command anywhere on our machine and not just inside the specific project. But this command is going to fail for me because I am on macOS. So for macOS or Linux operating systems, you would need to add sudo in front, else you're going to run into permission issues like this. So I'm going to clear this and rerun the command, but this time around I'm going to attach sudo in front. So sudo npm install like this, and I'll provide my password and let the installation complete. Now once we have installed this, we're going to make use of the NestJS CLI to go on and create a new NestJS project. And now the installation is done for me. I'm going to create a new project here. So I'll say nest new and then the name of the project, because nest new is going to help us scaffold the brand new NestJS project, and it's going to create the folder structure, install the core dependencies, and also set up TypeScript out of the box. So let's do it. Let's run nest new, and then we're going to say nestjs-auth, which is the name of the application in my case. So whatever you want to call your application. Go on and execute this. I'm going to choose Yarn as the package manager of choice. I like working with Yarn. And let's give this a moment for the installation to complete. Okay. So now the installation is done. As we can see over there, we need to cd into the newly created NestJS Auth application. And once we are here, then you can go on to open this up with your code editor. In my case, I'm going to make use of Visual Studio Code. Now we have a bunch of files and folders that got created. Let's walk through the different files so that we can understand the project. I quickly want us to go through the different files and folders that got generated. And let's start by coming into the source folder, because here we have the main.ts file. This main.ts file is the entry point of our entire application. And when we run pnpm start dev, this is the first file that is going to run, okay? And over here in line 5, we have this nextFactory.create where we pass in the app module. All this does is it goes on to boot up our NestJS application, making use of the application module as the root module over here. So we pass in the app module and NestJS handles everything from there. And in line 6, where we have application.listen, it just goes on to start up the HTTP server on port 3000. Now, if we come into the app module, which is very much important because this is the root module of our application, so it's top of the module 3, and every feature that we build, so authentication, users, tags, is going to get imported into the app module. And this app module also has this at Decorator, which tells Next.js that this is, or this class, which is the app module class, is a module. So it takes in an object that has like 4 possible keys. So the first one we have here is the import key at line number 6. So other modules that this module is going to depend on is going to be brought into the imports. And the controller just goes on to handle incoming HTTP requests. And then the providers that we have here, so things like services, things like guard, anything we want to inject is going to come into the providers here. So we can see we're injecting the application service in here. That's because the application service also has a decorator, which we'll come to in a moment. Now here we have the app controller, and this is just a sample controller which returns hello world. We have this at controller decorator, which marks this class as a controller. So controller goes on to handle incoming requests and also the return responses. Okay, we're going to see how we can customize this controller that we have over here. So this at controller decorator. We also have this at get decorator, which maps this method. So the get hello method, so it maps it to get request. So when NestJS reads this decorator, it knows that when a get request comes, it needs to call this get hello method, which is going to also call this get hello from the application service. Now, before we go over to the service, let's take a look at this controller, because this controller, this constructor that we have over here, this is dependency injection that is going on here. Instead of doing something like the new application service inside the controller, we are going to declare what we want, and NestJS is going to inject it for us. So that's all that we're doing here with this constructor private read-only. It's one of the most important concepts in NestJS. Now, taking a look at the app service, this also is a sample service, and services just go on to contain business logic. So things like database calls, calculations, anything that isn't related to HTTP request is going to be handled by the application service. And here it has this at injectable decorator, which was the decorator I was talking about, which marks this class as something that NestJS can inject in other classes. So without this decorator, NestJS is not going to be able to know that this class exists in its own internal dependency injection system. Okay, so that's what this at injectable decorator over here is doing. All right, so this is pretty much it. This service is going to get called by the application controller, and this application controller is returning whatever that is being returned from the application service. So in this case, the application service is going to discuss with the database, perform some logic, perform some calculation, and once it's done, it's then going to return, in this case, just returning the get hello world. That means a get request coming into application is going to return this get hello world over here. Now let's continue. Let's come into the nest CLI.json, which is a nest CLI configuration file. So the NestJS CLI configuration file. And basically NestJS just knows how application is structured with all these keys that we have over here, starting with the source root that tells NestJS where our source code lives. So in the source folder, NestJS is going to be able to know whenever we run nest generate. And this delete out there is when we build our project, the compiled JavaScript goes into the dist folder, that's the distribution folder. So this delete output there means it clears that folder before every build so that we don't get a stale compiled files, okay, as the result. And this collection tells the CLI the set of code generation templates to use. In this case, it's making use of the at NestJS schematics. So that's all that we have over here. Okay, so that's pretty much everything. Let's see if we're missing out. No. So I'd like us to clear the different files that we have here. So the boilerplate that we are not using, we are going to delete the controller, so the app controller, and then we're going to delete the spec file, which is the test file. And then we're also going to delete the application service.ts file. And now once we have them deleted, let's also do some cleanup in the application module. So right here inside the application module, I'm going to delete the imports and also get rid of the controller and the provider options that we have over here just to make this clean. Okay, so the next thing we're going to focus on is to install the different dependencies or packages that we're going to need for our project. Let's start by installing the core dependencies. I'm going to open up my terminal and hit clear, and I would say npm add at nestjs/config and also at nestjs/jwt and also at nestjs/throttler. The NestJS config package is going to help us to read our env files and make it available via the config service. the @NestJS/JWT is going to help us to sign and also verify the JWT tokens. And NestJS throttler is for rate limiting and also to prevent brute force attacks. I'm going to clear and let's install the database packages. So npm add drizzle-orm and also at neon database/serverless. So run the installation. This package, what they're going to do is just their neon progress driver that's going to help us for serverless environments. So let's clear this. And then we're going to install the authentication utilities. So give me a moment, let me clear and say npm add bcrypt.js. We also need to install class validator. So class validator, also class transformer and cookie parser. Now class validator is going to give us decorators like @isEmail, the min length, which we use for DTO validation. And then we also have the class validator, which is the class transformer, which is going to work with the class validator for transforming incoming requests. And lastly, we have the cookie parser, which just helps us to pass cookies for incoming requests so that we can also go on and read the refresh tokens. So that's all they are doing over there. And the next thing we need to install is Resend for transactional emails. So I'm going to clear this and say npm add Resend. Resend is just going to help us for sending transactional emails. And we have the API docs packages. So npm add, we're going to add @NestJS/Swagger and also Swagger UI Express. So this is just going to help us to auto-generate interactive APIs documentation for our backend. And lastly, we have the development dependencies. Okay. So let's install the dev dependencies that we have. Let's clear this. And we're going to say npm add -d. We need the types for bcrypt. We also need the types for cookie parser. So @types/cookie parser. We need the Drizzle Kit, which we haven't seen, and then we also need .env. The Drizzle Kit over here just a CLI tools that we're going to use to generate and also run database migrations. Now we are done with the installation. We are going to go on and set up the environment variables. Next, we need to create an env file just at the root of the folder here. We're going to say .env. And for the environment variables, we need the database URL. So let's have database URL, which we're going to get from Neon Database in a moment. And we also need to set up the JWT access secret. So I'll just say JWT_access_secret. And we also need the JWT access expires in. So JWT access expires in. We also need the JWT refresh expires in. And we also need the resend_API_key. And lastly, we need the app URL. And we also need the port. For the ports, we're going to set it to 3000. Remember, if we come right inside the main.ts file, here you're going to see that it's trying to read the port from the environment variable. So that's what we are setting here. And for the app URL, we're going to set it to localhost 3000, just like this. We also need the .env.example so that whenever you clone this project, you're going to have access to the environment variables that you could set or know what keys to set. And let's see what we're going to do over here. Let's paste in this command so that we can generate the refresh token and the access token. So I'm going to drop this in so that we can generate this token over here. The reason why we need two separate tokens is so that if, let's say, the refresh token gets stolen, it could also be used as the access token. So we want to prevent that by generating two separate tokens here. So I'm going to paste this in here, but inside the .env package, the .env file. And it seems we are also missing the refresh token. So let's also copy this, and then we're going to create the JWT_refresh secret just here. So JWT_refresh_secret, and we're going to paste in this secret token over here. All right, so let's save this file. And what else are we missing? Let's double check the env example. I'm just going to leave some placeholders here. But let's copy the JWT refresh secret, okay? And let's come back here and drop it in here. So I'm going to say the JWT access secret, I would say some secret. And then for the JWT refresh secret, I'll just say another _secret so that we can update these once we have them. Now, what else are we missing? The JWT access expires in. That fix this typo. So it's going to expire in 15 minutes. That's where the JWT access is going to expire in. But for the refresh token, we're going to extend it to expire, let's say around 7 days, just like this. And let's also make sure we have the same value stored in the .env.example. I'll just double check. Yeah, 15 minutes. And also for this, I'm going to set this to 7 days, just like this. Okay, so we have set all of these up. We are definitely missing the database URL, which we're going to get in a moment. I'll just drop this placeholder here. And also the Resend API keys. So we're missing these two. Let's see how we can get the database URL from the Neon database. So I'm going to head over to NeonDB and I will see you over there. Now I have this Google search for Neon database, and you want to click on this result, which is going to take us to the Neon application, so their website here. And then I'm going to sign up. I'm going to create a new account. But if you already have one, you want to go on and log in, of course. So this tries to take us to console.neon.tech, which is where you want to be. And over here, I'm going to authenticate via Google, and I'll just speed up everything real quick over here. And once you're authenticated, the next step would be to create an organization, because projects are actually created within organizations. So yeah, so you want to create an organization. I'm going to give this the organization name of Code with Lari over here. So Code with Lari. And every other thing can remain the same. And then I'm going to hit on next. Now we need to create a project within this organization. So I'll just go with the name of nest-auth, nestjs-auth like this. And I will hit on create project. So let's give this some time. And you can see over here, we have the connection string, which we need for our application. And we can show the password here, and let's copy this. And then if you check the connection parameters, you can see what it's actually all about. Now, in the application, I'm going to paste in the database URL here. So please do generate yours. This is going to be invalid once I'm done with the tutorial. And yeah, we want to continue. Now we want to hit on go to project so that we can just have a feel for the dashboard that got created for us. And let's come over to the tables. This is where our different schema, like our users table, this is where we're going to be able to inspect it. But for now, we do not have any, so we're not going to see anything, and we can continue over to Resend. So I just have a search here for Resend, and we want to go over to resend.com. And over here in resend.com again, I'm going to create a new account. So I'm going to start up from scratch. I'll hit on the get started button over here. And I'm going to continue with Google, and I would also fast forward this process. And now we are authenticated. We want to add API key. So this is what we want to do, which is going to give us or reveal our API key. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm just going to click on this copy button over here and come back to the application. And over in the application here where we have the Resend API key, that's where you want to drop this in just like this. So go on and save this. And I'm going to close up the env and back here. So this is where we can send emails. There's something we should have in mind. We can only send emails to our own email address that we use to create this, unless you do go on and set up a custom domain. Now, whenever we send emails, if you come over to this emails section that we have over here, then you're going to be able to inspect the different emails and see the emails that has been sent. But if you want to set up your own domain, maybe you want to go live, you want to come over to the domain section and hit on add domain. So you should already have your domain. You're going to add the name, and then you're going to set up the DNS records for your domain right here. Now we have the environment variables that we need. The next thing we need to do is to now configure the app module so that we can read the environment variables and also set up the environment variables for our entire application. Now we have set up the different environment variables. Now we need to make sure that we configure this so that it's available throughout our application. And one way we can do that is by coming into the app module, and inside this import array, we're going to set up the config module. Let's import the config module from @nestjs/config. And inside this import, we're going to configure it for root. So we're going to say config module.for root. Now you might be wondering what is config module, or what is the for root doing over here. And this for root is just a NestJS pattern for configuring a module once at the root level of the application. And we call it here in the application module. Remember this application module, if we check out the main.ts, we are going to see in here that on line 5 that the next factory creates our application based on the app module. So we're going to set this once in the app module, and we call for root. And basically this means we're never going to call for root again in any other module. It's just a one-time global setup here. And then we're going to continue by setting is global true, and we will not have to import the config module in every other module. So the variables are going to be available throughout the application via or making use of the config service. That's why we set is global to true. We can already set another setting, which is an expanded variable to true. So I'm going to come just right after the is global true, and here we're going to have the expand variables, so like this, and we're going to set it to true. And this just goes on to allow us to reference other environment variables inside the .env file, and we're going to do this by using the var name syntax, the interpolation var name syntax. So for example, in here inside the env example, but you want to do this in your .env, we can have something like the base underscore URL. And this base underscore URL, let's copy this value from the app URL here, and let's say this is the base URL. Now the expand variable true is going to allow us to do something like this, where we can say the app underscore URL, and then we're going to have the $ and the interpolation just like this, the base URL here. Now without having the expanded variable true, we will not be able to do this, because this is going to be treated as a literal string and not like expanding the value that we have in the base URL. Okay, so that's what we're able to do by making use of this expanded variable set to true. Now we have the config module available throughout the entire application. Let's set up our database model, so Drizzle ORM and also NeonDB. Let's set up Drizzle ORM plus Neon. I'm gonna save this file, but actually before we get started, I want to come over to the .env.example so that I can point this fix over here. So it should be port 3000. Make sure you fix it in your .env. Now we're going to be creating a new file inside the source folder, and that is going to be called db. And inside the db folder, we're going to have this schema.ts file. And let's start by bringing in the imports in here. So I'm going to import all of these from drizzle-orm/pg core. And that is going to be the pg table, the text, the timestamp, UUID. We also have pg enum, and then we have boolean, just like this over here. Now let's start by creating the enums. We're going to export const the user role enum. So export const user role enum like this, which is going to be equal to pg enum here. And then we're going to pass the user role, which is the enum name, and then the values is going to be the user and admin. If you have moderator or anything like that, you want to add it here. Now after this, I'm just quickly going to format this real quick, just over here, quick fix, and I'm going to say fix all auto fixable problems. And then we have the user table. So export const users, and this is going to be equal to the pg table, and the table name is going to be users. And now we're going to define the different columns. So we're going to have the id column, which is going to be of type UUID, and then we're going to have id right in here, and we're going to say default random and dot primary key, just like this. And the next is the email. So the email is going to be a text, and we're going to pass email in here, and then we're going to say not null, and we want to make the email to be unique. So here let's have dot unique. The next thing is the password hash, and this password hash is going to be of type text, password hash over here, which is not null also. Now we have the name. The name is going to be of type text. Let's come here. The name is going to be text, and we'll have name, and then we're going to have not null over here. And then we also have the role. The role is going to make use of this user role enum that we defined up here, and then we're going to pass role. We're going to say not null, and let's give it a default. The default is going to be equal to user, so user is going to be the default role. We also have is verified. Okay, so just over here, let's have is verified. Is verified is going to be a boolean, and this boolean is going to be is verified. We're also going to say not null, and let's give this boolean a default value of false. So we're going to say dot default, which is going to be equal to false. We're going to have the verification token. So the verification token here is going to be a text, and this text we're going to pass in the name verification token, just like this. No extra configuration needed here. And then we're going to pass the verification token expires at. So here we're going to have the verification token expires at, which is going to be of type timestamp. just like this. And here we're going to make sure that we pass in the reset underscore token underscore expires at like this. Now the next thing we have is the reset token. The reset token is going to be of type text, and we're going to have the reset token here. And then we're going to have the reset token expires at, which is going to be of type timestamps. So expires at timestamps like this. And then we're going to pass reset underscore token underscore expires at inside these timestamps here like this. Let's also have the hash. So the refresh token hash here like this, which we're going to store a hash version of the refresh token in DB. And this is going to be of type text. And we're going to pass the refresh token hash just like this. And lastly, we need the created at as well as the updated at. So created at is going to be a timestamp. We're going to have created at, and the default is going to be default now. And then we're going to say not null here. And lastly, we need the same for updated at. So let's have updated at, which also is going to be a timestamp. And then we have updated at like this, dot default now, and then we say not null. All right, so with all of these, let's see if we can fix these linting errors that we have. I'm just going to quick fix again and fix all issues here. Now the next we have is the tax status enum. Let's have the tax. Here we're going to export const. We're going to have the tax status enum, which is going to be equal to the pg enum again. And here we're going to have the tax status, which is the enum name. And then the values is going to be this list, the list of strings where we're going to have to do, we're going to have in progress, and then we're going to also have done. Now let's have the tax. Let's export const tax is going to be equal to pg table. And then we're going to have the table name, which is going to be tax, and then different columns in here, like the ID, which is going to be of type UUID. And then we're going to pass the ID, and then we're going to say default random and also dot primary key. We also have the title, which is just going to be a text. And here we'll pass title and say not null. And then we need the description, which is also going to be a text, and we're going to pass in description over here. Now the next thing we're going to have is the status. So after here, we're going to have the status. The status is going to be the tax status enum. We're going to pass status, and then we're going to say not null, and the default is going to be to do. And then we're going to have the user ID. This is going to be referencing the user's table. So UID like this. We're going to say not null. And here let's have the dot references, which is going to take in this function in here. And in here, what do we want to pass? We want to pass the users.id, and then we also want to pass in an option object here so that we can say on delete cascade. So in here, we want to say on delete, and we're going to go with cascade as a string here. Now we also need the last two, which is created at and also updated at. So here we're going to have created at like this, which is going to be this timestamp, and we're going to have created at. So timestamp like this. And in here, we want to open it up. So we pass created at, and then dot default now. And we're going to say not null. I just duplicated this so we can have the same for updated at. And here also updated at like this. And let me auto format the errors that we have here. Quick fix, fix all problems. And we still have errors here. And that's because we need to call this not null over here like this and like this. Now to wrap this up, let's also have the different types that we're going to be exporting. So somewhere here, we're going to export type for user, and user is going to be type of the users table dot infer select. So users dot infer select. And then I'm going to bring this down 3 more times just like this. So we can have for new user in here. So new user, and then we're going to infer insert, not select. And we're going to do the same for tax. So we're going to export type tax, which is going to be equal to tax.infer select, and new tax here is going to be equal to infer insert, just like this. So these are the different tables that we have created. We now also need to set up the Drizzle database instance. So we need the index.txt file so that we can set up the Drizzle database instance and then configure the Drizzle Kit in our application. I'd like us to fix some bugs that I noticed before we continue. I noticed that I mixed things up. So this is meant to be tags and not users on line 48 and 49. So let's update this to be tags. And over here, the key mapping for the verification token expires at. So let's also update this like this. So to create the Drizzle DB instance, we are going to create an index.ts right inside the DB folder. And yeah, so let's bring in the imports. We are going to import Drizzle, and Drizzle is going to come from drizzle-orm neon http. And then let's also import neon. Neon is going to come in from at neon database /serverless. And lastly, let's import everything as schema from our schema file. Now we're going to create the SQL. So const SQL is going to be equal to neon, and we're going to pass our database URL, which is process.env.database URL like this. So what's going on here? This neon that we are calling here is going to create this serverless Postgres connection, making use of our database URL. And we're going to pass the schema to it so that Drizzle is going to know all about our queries, and also so that we can have type safety in our application whenever we are calling queries, because it already knows about our schema. So that's what we're going to set up here. We're going to export const db, and this db is going to be equal to Drizzle. And now we're going to pass the SQL here, and we're going to pass in our schema just right here. So now I'm going to fix all of these, and this is the time where we're going to configure the Drizzle kit. So in here, we're going to have this drizzle.config.ts file. And let's bring in .env/config, and let's also import define config, which will come in from the Drizzle kit, because we need this to define the configuration settings. So out here, we're going to export the default define config, and we're going to pass in the schema, which is where our schema is located. So our schema is inside the source folder. We have the db, and we have the schema.ts file. We're also going to pass out, and we're going to point it to a Drizzle folder, which is going to be automatically generated whenever we run db generate command, which we haven't set up in our package.json. And then we have dialect. We are going to pass PostgreSQL, which is the database dialect. And lastly, we need to pass also the db credentials object, and we're going to pass the URL, which is process.env.database URL. So that's our neon connection string from the env. So I'm going to fix all these errors that we have here, and we need to find a way to apply changes. Now, we have two ways for doing this. Let's open up the terminal. So I'm going to show you the two ways we have. One is good for development, and the other is good for production. So I'm going to clear here, and one command we can run in development is pnpm db push. We don't have this yet in our package.json. We're going to set this up in a moment. And another one is going to be the pnpm db generate. So in production, this is going to be your process. You're going to run pnpm db generate. Once we set the command, if you execute it now, it's definitely going to fail, but we're going to set it up in a moment. And once you generate the migration, then you want to apply the migration by saying pnpm db migrate here, which is going to apply the migration file to the database. Let's set it up in the package.json. So we're going to set up this script, which I would set somewhere around, let's say, just below, not there. Yeah, so just below the start prod. Let's have the db push, which is going to be Drizzle Kit push like this, making use of Drizzle Kit. And I think I'm just going to bring this down a couple of times. So Drizzle Kit push, I'll just bring this down 2 more times. And the next is studio. And for the studio, it's also going to be Drizzle Kit Studio. And the next is generate, which is then going to be Drizzle Kit generate. And lastly, we have migrate here. So let's have migrate, which is going to run Drizzle db kit migrate. Now let's test our connection, and let's test if everything we've done has worked. Let's open up the terminal, and I'm going to run the db push command. So here, execute this command, and let's give this a moment. Now this is going to go on and create the users table and also the tab tables, the tags tables in our neon database. And then we're going to open up the studio to confirm once the migration is done. As you can see, it is pulling the schema from database and the changes has been applied. Let's call the studio. So pnpm db studio, which is going to give us a local preview where we can examine and inspect our database to know the values that we have over there. And this is the URL where we can visit the Drizzle Studio. Once you click on this, it's going to open up on your browser. So let's click on it. and I would say open up. And now we're going to give this a moment for it to load. And once it loads, we can expect at least we expect to see the tables in there. So we expect to see the users table as well as the tax tables as we have pushed the changes right to our database. So just give this a moment. And you can see here we have the tax table and the users table. And if we also refresh the live database, you would see the same thing here because we are making use of the live database in our local machine. Definitely in a real application, you would have two different databases. Now we're going to set up global pipes. We're going to set up things like filters, and we're also going to set up Swagger. I'm going to shut down the studio that is currently running, and then I'll clear this and also close all these tabs that we have open. Now, in order for us to catch and also process unhandled exceptions across our entire application, we need to set up a global exception filter, which is what we're going to do right now. So we're going to start by coming into the source folder, and inside the source folder, we need to create a common folder. And inside the common folder, we need to create a filter folder, just like this. And in here, we're going to create this file. So the http:/exception.filter.ts file like this. Now in here, we have a couple of imports. So I'm going to import all of these, and they'll be coming in from at NestJS/common. So that's the exception filter. We also need to bring in the catch decorator, arguments, host, and then HTTP exception, and lastly, HTTP status. We also need to import this type. So this type request response will come from Express. Now we're going to have the catch decorator right here. And if you see from this tooltip, this decorator marks the class as a NestJS exception filter, and an exception filter handles exceptions that are thrown and not handled by application code. And we also see over here, it tries to explain that this decorator class must implement the exception filter interface. So this catch over here with no arguments is going to catch every exception that is thrown anywhere in the application. So it could be HTTP exceptions or unhandled or unexpected runtime errors. So here, let's export the class. We're going to export this class HTTP exception filter. HTTP exception filter, and then it's going to implement the exception filter class like this. Now we're going to have access to this catch method, which is going to have the exception. Exception here is going to be of type unknown. And then we also have access to the host, and the host is going to be of type arguments host. So let's have the context so that we can get the response. In here, we're going to say const, just like this. Const context is going to be equal to host.switch to HTTP. And now we have the context, we can get the response. So we're going to say const response is going to be equal to the context.get response. And then we're also going to have access to the request. So let me close this up just like this. And for the request, const request is going to be equal to the ctx.get request. Now, this is a generic type, which means we can say this is going to be of type response from Express, just like this. And this also is going to be of type request from Express. Now, I want to have the status because we want to be sure, or want to check if it's a HTTP exception, which is something like not found or unauthorized. We want to make use of the status code. Otherwise, we want to default to 500 internal server error. So we say const status is going to be equal to the exception if it's an instance of the HTTP exception. If that is true, they want to get the exception from the status from the exception. So we'll say the exception.get status. So we're going to call it like this. Otherwise, we're going to say it's going to be a HTTP status.internal server error, just like this. Okay, so let me just fix all these errors we have here. And next, we want to get access to the exception response. So the exception get response can always be could be a string or an object, but we want to normalize the message so it's always a string or an array. That's what we're going to do here, just to try to normalize it. So let's say the const for the exception response, just right here. Const exception response. And we're going to get the exception. So we're going to say the exception if it's an instance of the HTTP exception. HTTP exception like this. We want to say the exception.get response. Remember, it could be a string or an object. So we're going to normalize it. Otherwise, we're going to say this string, which is going to be the internal server error, just like this. Now we're going to have the message. Let me also format this quickly. So const message. I'm going to say just here, message is going to be equal to type of exception response. Let's check if it's a string. So if it's a string, then we want to still make use of the exception response. Otherwise, we are going to transform it like this. We're going to say otherwise. So I'll just bring this down. The exception response in parentheses. So exception response, just give me a moment. Yeah. As record. So the record could be a key with a string and a value that is unknown. So we don't know the value. Then one access.message here. Otherwise, we're going to make use of the exception response. So exception response here. Now, we want to make the front-end developers happy. We want to make sure that every error in the application has a specific structure, which is going to be like the status code, the message, the timestamp, and also the path. So we want to always return this kind of error response to the front end. So to do that, we are going to say the response.status, and then we're going to pass the status, and then .json is going to have this object with the status code. And now the status code is going to come from the status that we defined up. And also the message is going to be equal to the message. And we also want to keep track of the timestamp. So here the timestamp, like this, is going to be a new date. And then we can call to ISO string. And lastly, the path is going to be equal to the request.url, like this. And let's just format everything and make sure everything is looking clean. Now we have set up the global exception filter. We are not making use of it yet. We need to configure this in the main.ts. So we're going to do other configurations right inside the main.ts file. Now we did set up this HTTP filter. Let's close this and come into the main.ts and also do some setup here. We're going to start with the imports. So right in here, we want to import validation pipe. So let's bring in validation pipe from NestJS/common and also bring in the config service from NestJS config. Then let's import Swagger module as well as document builder, just like this. And they would come from at NestJS/Swagger. Then we need to import cookie parser. So we're going to import everything as cookie parser, and they would come from cookie parser like this. And finally, let's bring in our HTTP exception filter, which will come in from the common filters HTTP exception filter file. Now in between here, let's start with the config service. So we're going to say const config service is going to be equal to app.get, and we're going to pass in the config service. Now let's set up cookie parser, also app.use, because it's a middleware, app.use cookie parser like this. And this cookie parser middleware we're setting up here is going to read the cookie header from every incoming request, and then it's going to populate the request.cookies. Otherwise, we're going to have undefined over here. Let's have our API prefix. So in here, we're going to say app.setGlobalPrefix, and we're going to have API. So this just means our API is going to have /API/ then the endpoints. Okay, so that's what we are doing here. Now we're going to say app.useGlobalFilters like this, and we're going to pass in our new HTTP exception filter right in here. Okay, so let's set up the Swagger config. We're going to say const config, because Swagger here is going to help us to generate the interactive APIs, so we need to configure it. So let's say const config is going to be equal to new document builder, and then we can set the title. And I'll just go with NestJS Auth API. Definitely you would give it the name of your backend here or your project. You can also set the description, anything of your choice. I'm going to say maybe something like complete authentication system here like this. Then you can set the API version. So I'll come here and say .set version. And this is going to be version 1.0, and also add bearer auth. Now this add bearer auth over here is going to add a field in the UI where we can paste in JWT for testing protected routes. And then lastly, we want to call .build, just like this. Now let's clean up things. It's not looking tidy like this. I'm just going to hover here, quick fix, and then fix all. Okay, so we have some errors. We're going to come back to those errors in a moment, but we're not done setting up the document. So what we're going to say right here is const document. is going to be equal to the Swagger module dot create document dot create document. I want to pass app to it, and then we're also going to pass config. Then we're going to say Swagger module, so Swagger module dot setup, and we're going to pass in /API/docs, which is the endpoint. So we want to now pass the app and also the document here. Okay, so we set up our config service. Let's have our port. So const ports, we're going to read the env from the config service. So .get, I want to get a number. And we're going to pass ports like this. Otherwise, we're going to have 3000 as the default. Now we have the port. Let's clean up the app.listen. We are just going to pass port here to it like this. And then we're going to have some logs. So console.log application running on, so application running on HTTP localhost, and then we're going to pass the port and the API. Now when we start up our server, we expect to see this log. Okay, we are also going to add another log over here, which is just for Swagger docs. So console.log, and then we're going to say the Swagger docs is at, so Swagger docs at, and then HTTP localhost, and then the port, and then we'll say /API/docs, just like this. All right, so why this error over here? Actually, this needs to be, it needs to be double question mark like this. And let's also clean up the linting errors that we have. And let's face these errors that we have over here. So this cookie parser, let's change the import. It's meant to be import cookie parser from cookie parser like this. And that fixes it. And for the exception filter, we need to make use of use global filters, not use global pipes. Now we are not making use of the validation pipe. We're going to do that here by saying app.use global pipes like this. And we're going to call the new validation pipe. I want to pass in this object of configuration. We're going to say whitelist true, forbid non-whitelisted true, and lastly, forbid non-whitelisted true. I also want to say transform true. Oops, so transform like this, and let me fix these linting errors that we have over here. Now, what this use global pipes is doing, because we have this validation pipe that is going to automatically help us to validate every incoming request against our DTO, which are the data transfer object classes that we are going to define using the class validator decorators. Now we have this whitelist true, which is going to strip any property that is not declared in that DTO. The forbid non-whitelisted is going to throw 400 if extra properties are passed, and this transform is going to convert the plain object into DTO class instances. We just have to test things out, and we can do that by saying pnpm start dev. So pnpm start dev like this. Now this command is coming in from our package.json, and once we start it, we expect to see these logs printed in the console. So if we come to the package.json, somewhere here, we should actually have it somewhere here. And the --watch, which means we are going to run it in watch mode over here. So it's going to keep the server running. So let's give this a moment. We expect to see the logs if we have set up everything correctly. So we also see the dist folder that got there, and this is the application endpoint. And once we click on the application endpoint, we are definitely going to have a 400 error, but you see our exception filter has kicked in with this nice formatted error response that the front end is always going to get regardless of the error. We haven't implemented that API endpoint yet. And if we click this, we are over now to our Swagger API documentation, which is very, very cool and handy for anyone that is just jumping right into the project. So guys, this is where things starts getting a little bit serious now, because we're going to create our core authentication endpoint. So we're going to start by setting up the user service and then the user module and importing it into the application module. Now you might see me create the service manually, and if you're more experienced, you might know that, okay, we could do this by making use of the NestJS CLI. But for those of us that are less experienced, I'd like us to do things manually, after which we can speed things up by making use of the NestJS CLI. All right, so we're going to create the user service, and we can go on from there. And yeah, so let's start. I'm going to clear this and also close this tab that we have open, and also shut down the terminal here. Now we're going to create a new folder here, which is going to be the users folder. This is going to hold the service, hold the users module. So let's start with the users.service.ts. We have a couple of imports. Let's import injectable. Injectable is going to come in from at NestJS/common. We also need to bring in our DB that we did set up, and DB would come in from at source DB, and also your users table, which will come in from our DB schema. And equal, which we can use to make comparison, is also going to come in from Drizzle ORM. And finally, we need to bring in a type of new user from DB schema. Let's have the at injectable class in here, just like this. And let's take a look at this tooltip. You can see here that this is a decorator that marks a class as a provider, and providers can be injected into other classes via the constructor parameter injection, making use of NestJS built-in dependency injection system. So we're going to mark this as injectable. We have seen this previously with the app service, so we're trying to make this here injectable by having this decorator. We're going to export the class user service, and this class is going to hold a different method. Remember, a service should talk to the database. We're going to start with the find by email, which is going to take in the user's email, just like this, which is of type string. And here we're going to return db.query.users.findFirst, and want to find first where the user's email is equal to the email that we receive here. And this is going to be used by the Auth Service to check if an email has already been registered. So we'll say where equals user email, the email like this. Let's also duplicate this so that we can have find by ID. So I'm just going to change things up rather than find by email. This is going to be by ID. Over here ID, and where the users.id is going to be equal to the ID that is coming in from here. And I'll just format this. Now we need another one for create. So let's have the async create, and create is going to take in the data which is of type new user. And here we're going to say const, we're going to destructure user because it returns an array. Is going to be equal to await db.insert. We want to insert users and into the users table, and the value is going to be this data, and we can say dot returning like this, and we can return user. Now the next one we have is update. So we're going to say async update. Update is going to take in the ID. The ID is of type string, and then we also have data. Data is going to be a partial type of our type of users.infer select. I think we have this type, I'm not quite sure. Infer insert. So we're going to say const user is going to be equal to await db.update. Oops, not this. db.update. I want to update the users table. And then we can call set.set, and we're going to pass in this data, and we're also going to update the updated at with a new date like this. And we need the where clause. So we're going to say where equals user ID is going to be equal to the ID that this function receives. And lastly, we say dot returning, and then we return the user object. So we have two more. Next is find all. I'm just going to format this real quick. So we're going to say async find all, and find all is just going to say the users table dot find many. So we're going to return db.query.users.find many like this. And lastly, we have delete. We're going to have async delete, which is going to take in the ID of type string, and we're going to await db.delete users. We're not returning anything. Dot where equals user ID is equal to ID. Now we have this. We also need to set up the users module so that it can hold this service that we just created. So let me just format this real quick. Now inside this users file, we are going to create the users module so we can import this service in there. And let's come here. We're going to create a file users.module.ts, and let's bring in the imports. We're going to import module, which will come in from at NestJS common. I will also need to import this user service. So user service, which is this file that we just created. We're going to have the at module decorator like this. We're going to set it up in a moment, but here let's export our class users module just like this. Now this module decorator is going to take in these properties, the provider, which we're going to pass the user service like this, and then we also need to have the exports here. exports, and then we have users service. So let me quickly format this, and then I'm just going to explain real quick. Now this exports over here makes this user service injectable into other modules, let's say the authentication module. And without having this exports here, the auth module can't use the user service even if it imports it. Okay, so that's why we need to also export the user service from the users module. Now we need to wire everything up in our application, and that is going to happen in the application module. So in here we already have the imports array. So now we're going to import the user service, which will come up, the user module, which will come from our users module. All right, so we have set up all of these. Our user service has been set up. The next thing we need to do now is to create the authentication DTOs, which are data transfer objects. We're going to create two DTOs, one for register and for login, and DTO stands for data transfer objects. Let's close all these that we've done previously, and now inside the source folder we need to create the new folder for authentication, and in here we're going to create a DTO folder, and let's start with the register.dto.ts. Let's start with the imports. We're going to import all of these, and they would come from class validator. We're going to import is email, also is string, and then min length is string like this, min length, and is not empty like this. Now we are gonna also bring in API property from at NestJS/Swagger so that we can build up the API documentation. We're gonna export the class register DTO, and here let's start with the name. So we're gonna say at API property, and let's have the example. So here we're going to pass this example configuration, which is going to be John Doe. And we're also going to now say is string for the validator. So is string like this, and is not empty. And that's for the name. So once we have this is not empty, down here we're going to have the name, which is going to be of type string. Now we're going to have the same for the email. So at API property, and the example here is going to be john@example.com. The user will see this example once they're making use of our documentation. So john@example.com, and then we're going to have the at is email, and then we're going to have the email, which is a string. Now let's also have for the password. So at API property, we're going to have the example, which is password 123, and then we can also pass a min length over here, so min length of 8, and then we have a string just like this. And then we're going to have the at min length of 8 and a password of 8 like this. Now we're done with this, I'm just going to quickly format everything we have here. And let's inspect this error we have on the name. It said property name has no initializer. It's just TypeScript. I'm going to fix it by having this exclamation sign. So we're telling TypeScript to relax. These properties will be set from outside. Let's have the login DTO.ts now. So we're going to create a new file for the login.dto.ts. And let's copy the import that we have from the register so we don't have to type out everything. And let's get rid of the min length. We don't need it over here. Let's have the class definition, export class login DTO. We're going to start with the API property for the email. So at API property, and then we're going to say example john@email.com. So john@email.com, and then we're going to have the at is email for the validation, and then we're going to have the email, which is of type string. Don't forget the exclamation, and then we're going to have the API property example for the password. So here we're going to have password 123. Then we're going to say at is string, and then at is not empty, and the password is going to be a string. So let's fix this error we have here, and the is not empty needs to be uppercase I, so not lowercase as we did set it over here. So let me quickly update this. And I also notice we have duplicates right up top, so let me remove these duplicates here that we have here. Now we have set up the login DTO and the register DTO. We need to create an email service. So users will need to confirm their email address before they can sign in via our API. Let's create the email service. Let's close all of this DTO that we created last time. And inside the auth, we need to create the email service.ts file. So we're going to have email.service.ts. And let's import injectable from NestJS /common. And then let's also bring in the config service from nextconfig. So I'll just come down here and import the config service from @nestjs/config. And lastly, we need to bring in Resend for sending our emails. So let's have Resend, which is going to come in from Resend. Okay, I'm going to format this. And now let's have our @injectable Decorator. And here we're going to export a class which we'll call email service. And let's have our private Resend property here, which is going to be of type Resend. And then in the constructor, we can initialize it by saying the private config service, which is going to be of type config service like this. And here we can then say this.resend is going to be equal to new resend. And the API key, we're going to get it from the config service .get, and then we called it resend_API_key, just like this. Now I'm going to format this quick, and what we are doing in this constructor by saying this.resend, we are initializing resend with the API key that is coming in from the environment variable. Now we're going to create a different method that this email service needs, which is to send verification email. So we're going to say async send verification email, which is going to take in the email as well as the token. And we're going to say app URL is going to be equal to this.config service.get, and we're going to pass app URL and also the verification URL. Verification URL is going to be equal to interpolating the app URL /API and then /auth and then /verify-email. And then the query parameter token is going to be equal to token. Token like this. All right, let me clean this up real quick and let's continue. So we're going to say await this.resend.emails.send, and then we're going to have this configuration from, and we can say from @onboarding @resend.dev. Okay. Now this from onboarding@resend.dev, we can use this in development, but in production, you're going to swap this out with your hosted domain that you have set up on Resend. And we're going to send this to the email that this function is going to receive. And the subject is going to be verify your email address, whatever you want to use here. And this is the HTML we're going to just drop in here to save our time. Now the HTML that we are passing in here is going to have this heading, which is verify your email. It also has this paragraph, and here you see we have this A with the href that is pointing to the verification URL that we set up. Now let's continue. We need another method to send password reset. So I'm going to fix this error by having string here, just like this. All right, so that fixes the error. Let's continue. Let's come over here and await have this async function send password reset email, which is going to take in the email address as well as the token string. So the token is going to be of type string. And let me actually copy what we have up here for the email app URL and verification URL. We're going to update the verification URL in a moment. And then we can await this.resend.emails.send. And also this is going to come in from onboarding@resend.dev. Don't forget to swap this with your real company email once you're shipping to prod. And then 2 is going to be the email that we get from up. And then the subject is going to be reset your email. And lastly, I'm going to bring in this HTML right in here and just drop it here like this. All right, let me quickly do some formatting that is going on here. I know we need to update the reset URL. So this reset URL that we have here, let me copy this so that we can update the verification URL to be reset URL. And it's going to be /API/auth, but now not verify email, it's going to be reset, and it's still going to take in the token query parameter, and then I'm going to quickly format this here. Okay, so this is everything we need for setting up the email service. Now we're going to work on the authentication service. So we have created the user service, the email service, the user service. Now we need to test things out, and for us to test out these services, we need an authentication service where we can work on methods like register method, login method, send verification email method. We are going to be doing that right here in this video. We are going to be creating an authentication service. So let's get started with that. Over here, let's create a new file, which we're going to call auth.service.ts. And we actually have a couple of imports here. So let's import all of these. Yeah, and they would come in from at NestJS/common. They're going to start with the at injectable decorator, and then we need to bring in conflict exception and also unauthorized exception, just like this, and then bad request exception, and lastly not found exception. Let's also import the JWT service from at NestJS/JWT, and then we also need the config service. So import config service from at NestJS/config. And now we're going to bring in bcrypt and crypto. So let's import everything. So import everything as bcrypt from bcrypt. And then let's also import crypto. We're going to import everything as crypto from crypto. Now let's import our user service and also our email service. So here we're going to import the users service and also the email service from the email.service. And then we need the types. Let's start with the register DTO. So import type register DTO from register.dto, and also import the type, the login DTO, which will come in from login DTO, and then response. So import type response. Response comes from express here. Lastly, we have the user type, which will come in from our DB schema. So we're going to start with the at injectable decorator. So over here at injectable, and we're going to export class Auth Service. And we're going to initialize the constructor method here. So inside the constructor, let's have the private users service. So users service is going to be type user service, and also the JWT service. So private JWT service is going to be of type JWT service. And also the config service is going to be of type the config service. And lastly, we have the email service here, which we're going to initialize to email service. Let's start with the register DTO method of this auth service. So we're going to say async register. Register is going to take in the DTO that we created, which is the register DTO. I want to first check if we have an existing user. So const existing user is going to be awaiting this.userservice.find by email. We're going to pass in the DTO.email over here. And let's have the check that if we have an existing user, then we want to throw a new conflict exception. So here we're going to throw a new conflict exception error that would say something like, exception error. I'm going to say something like an account with this email already exists. Something like this is going to work. And then we're going to now hash the password. So let me quickly format this. And let's have our password hash just down here. So we're going to say const password hash. I'm going to make use of bcrypt. So we're going to await bcrypt.hash. We're going to pass in the DTO.password and the sort rounds of 12 over here. So what we're doing over here is basically we're hashing the password before we store it in our database, and we're making use of bcrypt.hash over here with 12 sort rounds, which is actually a good measure between security and also performance for a web application. Now let's also have the verification token. I'm going to fix this and let's continue here. So const verification token. Verification token. We're going to make use of crypto.randomByte32 because we're trying to generate the verification token, which is a random hex string. So we're going to say crypto.randomBytes here, and then we'll pass 32, and then we'll call to string and we'll pass hex. Let's also set up the expiring time. We're going to say const verification token expires at, and we want to set it to 24 hours. So we're going to say new date. So the user would have 24 hours to verify their email. Oops. So we're going to say new date like this. and then we can call date.now plus 24 times 60 times 60 times 60 times 60 and then times 100 or 1000, which means 24 hours from now. Just drop in this comment. Alright, so it seems we have an error somewhere. Let me close this. Looks like I have mixed things up, so I'm going to close this and remove one here, and also I'll just format this real quick. Okay, so as I said, this is going to generate a random token for us. So it's going to give us 32 random bytes of hex characters, which is secure and also practically impossible to guess. Now we have the verification token. We're going to create the user, so store the user in database, making use of the user's service. So let's do that somewhere around here. We're going to say const user is going to be equal to await this dot user service, and we can call dot create. We're going to pass in the email, which is the DTO.email, and also the name is going to be equal to DTO.name. Then we also need to pass in the password hash, the verification token, and the expire verification token expires at here. All right, seems we have an error. We're going to continue and send the email. So this dot email service dot, so email service dot send verification email. Then we're going to pass the user dot email and also the verification token here, just like this. And let's return the message, which is going to say registration successful. Please check your email to verify your account. Please check your email to verify your account, like this. And let me fix this expires at. Looks like we have an error. And yeah, I'll just remove this M that we have here. Now we have this warning which says promises must be awaited. There are actually two ways we can handle this. Now it's either we use a fire and forget approach, or we go on to await this. If we await the sending of the email, the API could take some time, and then we are going to have our application kind of slowed down for that. So I'm going to show you how you can go on to make use of the two approaches. So if you use await here, you would have to wait for the email to be sent before you continue. But I'm going to make use of void, and void means fire and forget. We're not going to wait for the email to be sent. The email is going to be sent at a later point in time. So that's what's going on there. Okay, so we have other methods to create. We're going to create the verify email method, and yeah, continue from there. Let's create the login method. So this is just going to come right after the register method. So let me just double check. Yeah, so here we're going to have the async login, which is going to take in the DTO, which is going to be of type login DTO, and then the response is going to be of type response. So let's have the user here. So const user is going to await this dot user service dot find by email, where we're going to pass the DTO dot email, and then we're going to check if we have a user. So if there is no user, we want to throw an error. So we're going to throw a new unauthorized exception, which is going to say invalid email or password. So we want to make sure that the user that is logging in is already registered in our application. Let's also check for the password match. So after this, just fix this here. So down here, I'm going to say const password match is going to be equal to await bcrypt.compare, and then we're going to pass in the DTO.password and also the user.password hash, like this. And if there is no password match, so if the passwords do not match, we also want to throw an unauthorized exception. So here we're going to throw a new unauthorized exception, and we're going to say invalid email or password. Now we're going to also block the login if the user hasn't verified their email yet. So password like this. And let's check here. So const actually is meant to be if. So I'm going to change this const that we have over here. So if user dot is verified as false, we also want to throw a new unauthorized exception. So throw new unauthorized exception where we say please verify your email to continue. So please verify your email to continue. Or you can say, please verify your email before logging in, whatever you prefer. Let me just change the text over here. Please verify your email before logging in. Now let's also have the tokens. We're going to make use of some methods that we do not have yet, so we're going to create them later. So let's come down here and say const tokens is going to be equal to await this dot generate tokens. We don't have this yet. We're going to create this soon. And then let's also have another one, this dot save refresh token, which is going to be the user.id token like this. And then we're going to pass in the tokens refresh token. I know it might not really make sense now until we create these methods, which we will do shortly. Let me fix this here. And then we want to set refresh token cookie. So we're going to say this dot set refresh token cookie, and then we're going to pass in the response and then the token dot refresh token like this. And lastly, we're going to return the object. So we're going to return this object here that's going to have the access token, which is going to be the tokens.access token. So tokens.access token, and then the user object is going to have the ID, which is going to be user.id. Also the email is going to be the user.email, and then we also have the name. And lastly, we also need to attach the role. So here we're going to have the role, which is going to be user.role here. Okay, so do we miss anything? Let me fix this here, the token, and let me also fix this linting errors that we have. Definitely we have other errors because we do not have this generate token, save refresh token, and also set token cookie. Let's do that next. Now, just after this login, we are going to create the token helpers. Let's start with the generate token. So private async generate tokens, which is going to take in user, and user is going to be of type user here. So const payload is going to be equal to this object where we're going to have sub, and the sub is going to be user.id. Then we're also going to have the email, which is going to be the user.email, and lastly the role is going to be user.role. Like this. Now we're going to try to create the access token, which is going to be shortly for just 15 minutes, and whenever it expires, the user would call another one, an endpoint, to get the refresh token. So we're going to say const access token. Access token is going to be equal to await this .jwt service .sign async. We pass in the payload, and then this object where we'll have the secret going to be this .config service.get, and we're going to pass the JWT access secret just here. And lastly, we're going to have the expires in, and the expires in is going to call this .config service.get JWT access. Oops, make sure I don't have any errors here. Expires in like this. Okay, so I'm going to fix the linting errors that we have over here, and now we're going to create the refresh token. The refresh token is going to live longer for 7 days, and it's going to be stored in an HTTP only cookie. That means JavaScript will not be able to access it, and it's going to protect our site from SSS attacks. So over here, we're going to have the refresh token. So const refresh token is going to be equal to await this .jwt service.sign async. We're going to pass in the payload and also the secret. It's going to be this .config service.get the JWT refresh secret underscore refresh underscore secret, and then the expires in is going to be this .config service, oops, like this, .get JWT underscore refresh underscore expires in. Please do make sure you check the values you have in your env, else you would have unexpected behavior. All right, let's return this object to the access token and also the refresh token. Okay, and fix this. Now we're going to have another one, which is the save refresh token. So private async function, nope, let's type it out, async function save refresh token, which we're going to pass in the user ID of type string and the refresh token also of type string. And we're just going to say const, oops, string like this. Yeah, so we're going to say const refresh token is going to be equal to bcrypt.hash, and we're going to pass in the refresh token and salt rounds of 10. So we're never going to store the refresh token. We only store a bcrypt hash of it. So if the database for some reason gets compromised, attackers will only get the hash, which they cannot reverse. Okay, that's why we are doing this over here with the refresh token. So we're going to say this.user service. Now I want to update the user service based on the user ID and also passing the refresh token hash like this. And let's fix this here. And it seems we have a typo, refresh token hash here. Now the last one, let's have the private set refresh token cookie. So this is going to set it in the cookie. And here we're going to have the response of type response, and then the refresh token, which is going to be of type string. Okay, so here we're going to say res.cookie, and we'll pass the refresh token, that's the name. And then the value is going to be the refresh token, and the options, we're going to pass HTTP only true. HTTP only true is just going to mean that this cookie, as we said before, cannot be accessed by JavaScript, and it protects our platform from SSS attacks. We can also pass the secure, which is going to be process.env, and then .node.env is equal to production. So this is going to be true if we are in production, and secure true means the cookie is sent over HTTPS. We're going to set it to false since we are in development. Okay, and then the same site here is going to be lax, and same site lax is just means the cookie is sent with the same site request and also top level cross-site navigation. It actually protects from CSRF attacks. Now lastly, the max age is going to be 7 days, and it has to be in milliseconds. So we'll say 7 times 24 times 60 times 60 times 1000. All right, so let's fix the linting error. We seem to have some errors here. And this .generate tokens, generate token is declared here. Actually, it should be generate tokens. So let's update this. And we have another error. Set refresh token cookie. So we need to update this to be cookie, just like this. All right, so the errors are gone. Now we need to create 2 more methods, one to log out to the user and the other one to refresh the token. That's what we're going to be working on next. Now, I did notice a bug before we continue. I'd like to fix this bug. So over here, it meant to be JWT access expires n. Okay, so that's what it needed to be. So let's continue. We're going to create this refresh method just after login. We're going to have async refresh, and we're going to have this refresh token, which is going to be of type string, and as well as the response, which also is going to be of type response here. So let's have a quick check. If there is no refresh token, so we need to throw a new error. So we're going to throw new unauthorized exception, which is going to say no refresh token, no refresh token found, or we can say provided. Now we're going to construct the payload. So let's payload, which is going to be of type this object. We're going to have sub is going to be a string. We know that's the user ID, and then we're going to have the email, which also is going to be a string. So what we're going to do, we're going to verify the token signature using the refresh token secret. So using a separate secret from the access means if it's stolen, the access secret cannot be used to generate new refresh tokens. So let's have our try catch block where we're going to have the payload is going to be equal to await this .jwt service, and then .verify async. We want to pass in the refresh token and this object here where we're going to have the secret. So the secret is going to be equal to this.config service.get the JWT underscore refresh underscore secret. So let's have the catch block here. In the catch block, we're going to throw a new error. So throw new unauthorized exception, and we say invalid or expired refresh token. Now let's have the user object because we want to make it of it. So const user is going to be equal to await this.user service.find by ID, and we're going to pass the payload.sub. Remember I said that's going to be the ID. So we're going to check if there is no user or no user.refresh token hash, because we want to use the refresh token hash. Then we want to throw an error that is going to say throw new unauthorized exception, invalid refresh token. So let's check if the token we found from the user matches what is provided. So let me fix this. And to check if the tokens match, we're going to compare the incoming refresh token against the one that's stored in HashDBM. If they don't match, we know that this token has been rotated or it's invalid. Okay, so let's say if, we're going to start with the const. So I'm going to remove this. So const token match is going to be equal to await bcrypt.compare. So we can use bcrypt to compare the refresh token. So .compare like this, the refresh token against the user refresh token hash. Okay, so refresh token hash. Then we're going to check if there is no token match. That means if they don't match, we know that this is an invalid refresh token like this. So we're going to issue a new access token. So if everything is okay, let's issue a new access token. So we're going to come down here and say const tokens is going to be equal to await generate tokens, which takes in the user object. Then we're going to say await this.save refresh token, passing the user.id and also the tokens.refresh token. And lastly, we want to set the refresh token cookie. So this.set refresh token cookie, which takes in the response and also the tokens.refresh token. Finally, we're going to return this object of access token. So access token is going to be the tokens.access token. Okay, and we can format all of these for errors. So we also need the logout method. So async logout is going to take in the user ID, which is of type string, and also the response, which is of type response. And here we're going to await this.userService.update. We're going to pass in the user ID, and this object where we have the refresh token hash is going to be set to null. So this is going to remove the refresh token hash from database, and it's going to invalidate the session as well. So even if someone has the old refresh token cookie, to no longer match anything that we have in our database. That's what we're doing. So let's also go on to clear the cookie. We're going to clear the cookie by saying res.clear cookie, and we're going to pass in the name, which is the token underscore refresh, the refresh underscore token, and we want to return this message back to the client that says message logged out successfully. Okay, so that's what we want to have. Let's fix the errors. And yeah, that looks to be everything we need to do here. And we are not making use of these methods. Yes, we also have one more method to implement, which we are going to be doing next. Our authentication service is missing the verify email method. So a way for users to verify their email, and you can implement this just after register here. So let's say async verify email is going to get called with the token as well as the response object, which is going to be of type response. And in here, we want to find the user with that exact token. So this is going to be await this.userService.find by verification token. We're going to implement this now. Since we skipped this, so we're going to be implementing this, and we're going to pass the token. So I'm going to copy this find by verification email, and this is going to be right inside of the user service. So in here, I would just implement this right at the top. So here we're going to have async find by verification email token, and this is going to take the token, which is of type string. And here we're going to return db.query. So we want to query the users table. So .users.find first. We're going to have the where clause. So where like this equals just like this. And then where the users.verification token is equal to token like this. And then I can format this and we can continue. So we should no longer have this error here. We don't, and let's continue. So we're going to have some check here. If we don't find the user, or if the user has not verified the email, if there's no token, we want to send the bad request exception, which is going to say invalid verification token. Now let's also check if the token has expired. So after this check here, we're going to check if the user, so if like this, the user.verification token expires at, if that is, and we're going to say if the user.verification token expires at, if it's less than the new date like this, then we're going to throw a bad request exception. So we're going to throw a new bad request exception that says verification token has expired. So verification token has expired. I want to tell the user, hey, please request a new one. Now I want to make the account verified. We're going to await. So we're going to come here and await this.userservice.update, where we'll pass the user ID and also this object here. We'll say it's verified is true, and also verification token null. So we're going to mark the account as verified. They want to clear the token, so the token cannot be used anymore. And we're going to say the verification token expires at is going to be null. So we are clearing the token here, so it's not reused. So let's have other tokens here. Want to log the user in. So const tokens is going to be equal to await this.generate tokens. I will pass the user object. So whenever a user verifies their email, we want to log them in automatically. It doesn't make sense to manually tell the user to go log in. So we're going to generate the tokens immediately, just as we are doing over in the login, just the same exact way we do over in the login here. So we're going to say, oops, it has to be outside. Await this.save refresh token, where we're going to pass in the user ID and also the tokens.refresh token here like this. And lastly, we're going to set this.refresh token cookie is going to be the response, and the token.refresh token. Now we're going to return this object here. So we're going to return the object is going to be the response we'll send back to the client. And it's going to have this message property that your email has been verified successfully. You are now logged in, okay? Successfully like this, you are now logged in. Okay, and we also need to send the access token, which is going to be the tokens.access token, and the user object. So user is going to be this object where we have the ID. It's going to, oops, it needs to be ID, and it's going to be users.id. Looks like this should be user.id, and then the email is going to be user.email. The name is going to be equal to user.name, and the role is going to be equal to user.role. And let me format the ESLint errors here. And if we scroll up to the top, I think we're done with the Auth Service. We're not making use of this. Now we're going to test things out, but we can't test things out without creating a controller. We need an authentication controller that is going to map the endpoints and call these services. So these methods that we have here in the authentication service, in the Auth Service, that's what we're going to be doing next. And in the meantime, before we come back, I'm going to be updating VS Code because I get the prompt over here for me to update. So guys, I'm going to see you once my update is done. All right, so let's build out our own authentication controller so that we can test things out, okay? So in here, we're going to have our auth.controller.ts. We have loads of imports here. We're going to import all of these from @nestjs/common. So @nestjs/common. Let's start with the controller decorator. So here we're going to have controller. We're going to have post. We're also going to have get. Then we're going to have body. We're also going to have query, res, request, and HTTP code, and lastly HTTP status. We also need to bring in a couple of things from @nestjs/swagger. So here from @nestjs/swagger. So we need to bring in API tags. We also need to bring in API operation. Let me fix this API operation. We also need the API bearer auth and API cookie auth. Now let's bring in types from Express. So here we're going to import type the request response type from Express. So response with a capital R. And then we're also going to bring in our authentication service. So let's import our Auth Service, and then also our register DTO from, and also our login DTO. And we also need to bring in a decorator we are going to create right about now. So let's import this public decorator. We don't have it yet, so we're going to have some linting errors, but we're going to create it now. So this is going to come from the common folder, and then we're going to create a decorators folder, and then we're going to have the current user dot decorator. Okay, now let's bring in also the current user. So here, actually let's import type user. So like this, and user coming from our DB, our DB like this schema. All right, so let's create this public decorator we don't have yet. I'm going to fix the linting errors we have, and we're going to come right into the common folder, and inside the common folder we are going to create another folder for decorators, and in here we're going to create the public.decorator.ts file. Okay, basically decorators are just functions that help us to attach metadata or attach behavior to, let's say, a class, a method, a property, or a parameter. We'll be using decorators throughout this tutorial with the controller decorator, stuff like that. So we're going to create our own public decorator, and we need to import set metadata to do that. All right, so let's do that. In here, we're going to import, I'm going to import set metadata, which is going to come in from NestJS common. And now we can export const is public. Export const is all capital letters, so is underscore public underscore key is going to be equal to is public. And then we also need to, I'm just going to separate this. And then we also need to export const public, which is now going to be equal to this function, which we're going to have set metadata and have is public key, and we're going to set it to true so that we can have our own @public decorator. All right, so let's fix linting, and this is public key that we have over here is the metadata key that the JWT Authentication Guard is going to be looking for. And when it finds it on a specific route, then it's going to skip that route for JWT validation because it's a public route. And here we have public, which is kind of a shorthand by going over to that route and having something like @set metadata is public true. This gives us access to our own decorator, @public decorator. So now I'm going to fix the imports, remove it and bring it back in. And I think we can just clear and let the IDE help us out with the import. So here we're going to bring in public, and it's going to come in from here like this. And now we are done with the import and creating our own decorator. The next thing we're going to do is to continue building out the controller. We need to create another decorator, create a param decorator before we continue. So inside these decorators, let's create this current user. So current -user dot decorator dot ts. Let's import the create param decorator, which will come in from @nestjs/common, and also the execution context. And then let's also bring in request from express. Nope, not from here. Let's bring in request from express, and also the user, which will come in from our schema DB. Let's create this type. So type request with user is going to be the request object, but one node chain in the user object like this. So user is going to be of type user. So let's export const current user, which is the decorator. So export const current user is going to be equal to create param decorator. It takes in this callback function that receives the data, which is of type unknown. And then we're going to have the CTX, unknown like this. And then we're going to have the CTX, which is the execution context. And in here, we're going to say the const request is going to be equal to the CTX dot switch to HTTP. And then we're going to call dot get request, which is going to return the request with user like this. And then we can return the request with user. And let me format this. So what's going on here? We see over here, this current user is going to be a param decorator, which is going to help us extract value from the request. So in here, we're going to extract the value from the request, and we're going to inject it as a parameter in the controller method. Let's see how it works. We're going to continue with our authentication controller, and in here, let's have start with the Swagger setup. Let's import it first. quickly. Let's import the current user. Okay, so let's start with the Swagger setup. We're going to have at API tags and then have auth, so it knows like this is the auth. And then let's have the at controller. So this is going to be auth controller, so /auth. Let's export class auth controller and let's initialize the constructor where we're going to have the auth service is going to be of type auth service. Let's have our first API route. Okay. So here we're going to, it's going to be a post route. So post like this, and then /API, and then /auth /register. And then we're going to have at public, making use of our public decorator, and then at post register here like this. Okay, so the register is going to be part of the URL, and then we have at API operation. We're going to give a summary here. Let's say something like register a new user. This is going to be the displayed in Swagger. And then we're going to have the function register, which is going to take, we're going to use the at body decorator, so we can pull in the body here, which is the DTO, going to be of type register DTO. Then we're going to make use of the auth service. So return this.auth service. Then we call the register method, register, and pass in the DTO. Just like this. So let's fix the linting errors, and I'm going to duplicate this. Let's see if it's actually quicker for us. And then I'm going to update this to get, because this is going to be a get request. So verify -email like this, and then we're going to have params for the token is going to be equal to some token like this. It's going to be a public route, but now it's going to be a get request that goes to verify -email. And get should be GET, actually uppercase G. So here for the summary, we're going to say verify email address and auto login. So that's what this route would do. And this is going to be verify, and auto login. Now this is not going to be registered. It's going to be verify email, and we're not going to have anybody here. It's a get request. So we're going to update this to have at query for the token like this, and then the token string. So we're going to use that query token to extract the token from the URL, and then we're going to have at res, and we're going to pass true to be true, and res going to be response. So this gives us access to the underlining response. So then we want to return this.auth service.verify email. I want to pass the token and the response because that's what it needs. Okay, we're going to type this out ourselves manually for the login route. So let's come down here. So just come down like this, and here let's have /post, and then /API /auth /login. It's also going to be a public route like this, and then we're going to have at post login, so /API /login, and then at HTTP code, we're going to have HTTP status .ok. Basically, this is going to go on and override the 201 created to become a 200 OK. So that's the default, we're overwriting it. And then we're going to have at API operation, also have the summary, which is going to be login and receive access. So login and receive access plus refresh tokens. So let's have the login method. Async login here is going to take in the body. So at body, and then the DTO is going to be the login DTO, and then at res, just down here, then we can have pass true, and then have access to the response, which is going to be of type response. So we're going to return this.auth service.login like this, and then pass in the DTO and the response. And let's quickly format this. Okay, so we still have more methods to write. We still have the refresh method, we still have the logout method, and the me method. Let's complete the controller so that we can test out these endpoints that we are creating. Okay, so let's create the remaining endpoints. We have this post endpoint here, so we're going to have post, and that's /API /auth /refresh, so we can refresh the token. So we're going to have at public is a public route, and then at post we're going to have the refresh, and then at HTTP code like this, then we're going to pass HTTP, oops, not as a string, so HTTP status.ok like this, and then we're going to pass at API cookie auth, and lastly we're going to have at API operation. So at API operation, we're going to pass in the summary, which is going to say something like refresh access token using the refresh token cookie. Okay, so let's have async refresh here. So it's going to take in the request at rec to give us access to the request, which is of type request, and also the response. So at res, we're going to say pass through to be true. And then we're going to have, oops, true like this. Then we're going to have the res, which is going to be of type response. So after this, we're going to get the refresh token, which is going to be equals to token like this. So this is going to be equals to the rec.cookie and then optional chaining dot refresh token. Then we can return this dot auth service dot refresh. So this dot auth service dot refresh. So we can pass in the refresh token and also the response like this. Let's fix this error that we have up here. This is meant to be a string, and let me also format this real quick. So we have this error and it's based on type any. Okay, it's actually a straightforward fix. We're going to have cookie just right here. So let's say const cookie is going to be equals to rec.cookies, and then let's cast it manually as record. So record an object where the key is going to be a string and the value is going to be a string or undefined like this. And then we can say this is going to be request.cookies here. And we still have errors because string or undefined. Okay, so that's because we said this can be string or undefined. So let's update this to just be string like this and no more errors. All right, so let's have the logout method. So posts and then /API/auth/logout. And like this. So we're going to have at post decorator is no longer a public route. At post and then logout like this. And then at HTTP code. So the code, we're going to transform it to OK 200. Okay. And then we're going to have at API bearer auth for Swagger, and then at API operation, which is going to also include the summary. So the summary here is going to be something like a logout and invalidate refresh token. So this is what the endpoint is doing. And then we're going to have the async logout, which is going to have our param decorator. So at current user. So this is how we use it. And then we have the user, which is going to be of type user. And then we're also going to have res pass through to be true, which gives us access to the underlining response, which is going to be of type response. And then we're going to return this.auth service.logout and then pass the user ID and also res like this. Let's wrap this up. Let's fix the errors that we have over here, and let's have the me route. So this is going to be a get to /API/auth/me. So let's have the get decorator me like this, and then the API bearer auth, so that we can get the current user, and also the at API operation like this. And then we're going to have the summary, which is going to say get current authenticated, get the current authenticated user. Gonna fix the typo here, just get rid of it. And yeah, so let's have async me, and we're also going to make use of the at current user decorator, and then it's going to be of type user, and we're going to return this object, which is going to have the ID of user ID, the email user.email, and then also the name is going to be equals to user.name, and the role is user.role, and lastly is verified. So is verified is going to be equal to user.isVerified. All right, so let's format all of these. And to, have all of, why do we have this error here? Okay, let's just get rid of the async method. Okay, to make all of these work together, we need to set up the authentication module. Okay, so that's what we're going to set now. So we're going to have the auth.module.ts, which we're going to later import in the app module. So let's bring in the imports. We're going to import module from NestJS/common and also the JWT module. So everything we're making use of in the state in the service. Let's also import the auth controller and then the auth service. And let's not forget the email service as well as the users module. So let's import users module. So we're going to have the imports, the module decorator. But before we continue, let's export the class. So let's come down here and let's export class app module. So this module decorator is going to have the imports array. And we're going to have the users module and also the JWT module. But now we're going to call .register and pass an empty object. Now remember when we had that for root stuff, register is actually more or less the same concept as for root, but now it's used for future modules, okay, that might need, let's say, different configuration in different parts of the application. But in this case, we are passing an empty object because we do not need to set a default secret, okay? So we don't need to set a default secret because the access token and also the refresh token, they're going to make use of different secrets. So here we're going to have the controllers and pass the auth controller, and lastly the providers is going to be the Auth Service as well as the email service. So here Auth Service and here email service like this. And let's fix this error that we have over here. Okay, so have the curly brackets, and let's also fix the linting errors. So to wrap everything together, let's come over to the app module and import the authentication module. So right here where we have the app.module.ts, so just after the users module, we want to have the application module over here. All right, so we have set things up. We have created the service, we have created the controller. Let's test our route. All right, so before we continue, we actually introduced the bug in our application because we did leave out a very important concept in NestJS, and that's guards. We created two decorators. So over here we have the current user decorator. And you see over here, we try to read the request context. So the context switched to HTTP, which is coming in from the request from Express. And there we try to access the request.user. Now, there is no point in our application at this point where we set the request.user. So that's going to be definitely undefined. And we use this current user decorator inside the app controller. So we come to the app controller and let's scroll up to see where we are making use of the current user decorator. So over here, you see we are trying to access the user object that we set from the request.user, but there's no point where we are currently setting this in our application. So we're going to fix that by, making use of a concept called guards. And if we also check the other decorator that we created, which is the @public decorator. So let's come over to the other decorator here. You would see right inside here that we have the set metadata where we set is public to true. Also, there's no place in our application where we're trying to check if a route is public, even though we attach it to, let's say, like this decorator to this logout handler. There's no place in our current application where we are checking if this is a public route or not, and then we allow the request to continue. That's what we're going to do. We're going to set up guards so that we're going to read the JWT from the user session, from the request headers, and based on the JWT value, we're going to know if we're going to continue the request, fetch the user, fetch the current user from our database, and then we're going to populate the user object to the request context. So that's what we're going to do with guards. We're going to walk through what guards are, and then the decorator, like the current user decorator, is going to get populated. So here where we have the request.user is then going to get populated with the current user object. So we're going to introduce guards in our application. So let's go through the process of creating this auth guard. I'm going to close all, and then in the common folder, we're going to create a new folder called guards. And then we're going to create this JWT auth file. So JWT-auth.guard.ts. All right, so let's start with the imports. We're going to import all of these from at NestJS/common. We're going to bring in injectable, and then we're also going to bring in can activate, and then the execution context, and lastly unauthorized exception. Let's also bring in reflector. We're going to see what it's used for in a moment. So let's import reflector from NestJS/core, so the core package, and also the JWT service from NestJS JWT. So NestJS JWT, and we also need the config service from at NestJS/config, and we now need the public key because we're going to make use of it to read the metadata. So we called it is public key, and lastly we need the user service. The user service from our user service. So how do we create this? We're going to start with that injectable decorator, and we're going to export the class by name JWT Auth class. And this is going to implement can activate, which is going to force us to have the can activate method. So like this. Let's start with the constructor initialization. So in here, we're going to have our constructor, and we're going to have the private reflector, which is going to be reflector. Reflector basically allows us to read metadata that is set by decorators. And then the JWT service is also a JWT service here. And then the config service is going to map to config service. And lastly, we have the user service. So let's implement, so the user service will map to user service. Yeah. All right, so let's implement the can activate method. So async can activate, we're going to make it async. And this is going to take in the context of type execution context, like this. And then it's going to return a boolean. So let's say this is going to return a boolean, a promise that resolves to a boolean. So the first we're going to do is to check if this route is marked as public routes. Okay, and we're going to do that by saying const is public. Let me fix this. So we're going to check if it's a public route, and we're going to say const is public, and this is going to then make use of the reflector. So the reflector.get all override method like this, and then we're going to pass the key, so it's public key, and based on the target, which is the context.get handler and also context.get class. So this get all and override is going to check the method first, then it checks the class. All right, so here we're going to say it's going to return a boolean like this. So now we're going to check if this is a public route. So if it's public, we are going to return true, and basically if the route is public, we are going to skip the JWT validation entirely, and we are going to return true. Okay, so this is meant to be if. So down here, let's have access to the request. So here we're going to say const request is going to be equal to the context dot switch to http dot get request, and then also the token. We want to extract the token from the header, so the token is going to be equal to this dot extract token from header, and it's going to take the request. Now we don't have this extract token from header method. We're going to implement it just down below here. So private extract token from header is going to take in the request, and the request is of type request, just here like this. And then we can say this is going to return a string or undefined. So we know this is going to be authorization bearer token, so we're going to destructure the type as well as the token from here. So from the request headers, so we're going to say the request.headers as unknown, just like this. And then we're going to say as record, so it's going to be an object with a string key and the string value. So I'm going to wrap all of these in parentheses, because now we want to access like .authorization, because we know that this is going to be authorization bearer token. I'm going to fix this bug. So here we're going to say .authorization. So that's available dot split, and then want to say that is true, we use it, otherwise an empty array. So let's return the type. We say if the type is equal to bearer, because we are going to destructure it, then we're going to say if that is true, then we want to return the token like this, otherwise we're going to return undefined. Okay, so that's what we are doing here like this, and let me format this so it's much more easier to read. So at this point we should have the token or not. Okay, so we're going to check this request. Let's map this as request here. All right, so let's say if there is no token, so the guard, we're going to throw an error. So we're going to throw a new error right inside of our guard here. So the unauthorized exception, like no access token was provided. Also, let's have the payload. So the payload is going to be the type of this object. So we have the sub, a string. We know the sub is this ID. We also have the email, which is a string. And lastly, we also have the role. And the role is going to be a string. So I'm going to fix these typos we have here. And this type mapping we are doing over here, we know where we do set it. So this payload here, if we check the authentication service over here, just down below where we do generate the token, you would see where we have this mapping here. So you see over here, the sub, which is the user.id, so important for us to know. So we can actually access this type, but let's continue. So we have the access token. We know that this is what is going to use to sign the JWT. So that's what we actually expect over here. Okay. So we're going to have a try catch. So we're going to try catch like this. We don't need the error. So we're going to say the payload is then going to be equal to await this dot JWT service dot verify async. Let's verify. And here we're going to have the token and pass the secret. So if this fails, the catch block is going to get triggered. So this is the JWT access secret. That's what we use to store it in our .env, just like this. Now in the catch block, we want to throw a new error. Maybe the verification was not successful. So we want to throw an unauthorized exception that says invalid or expired token. So our guard is going to catch it and stop. So here we're going to go on to load the full user from database, and we want to attach it to the request. So we can do that here. So const user is going to be equal to await this dot user service, and then dot find by ID, and we're going to pass the payload dot sub. Remember, the sub is the user ID. So we can have a user or not. In the case of there is no user, we are going to throw an error that unauthorized user no longer exists. Okay, so user no longer exists. That means this user ID is not in our application, something like that. All right, but if there's a user, we're going to say request.user, the most important part, is going to be equal to user, just like this, and then we need to return true so the request can continue. Okay, so we have errors here. Let me fix these linting errors first off. And what other? So we have over here the request.user.not exist on type request. So we're going to cast it manually here. So we're going to say and. So we're going to attach the user object just as we have done previously. And then we're going to have the user, which is of type user, that needs to come in from our schema. And then I'm going to format this here. So this is the most important part. You see over here where we said the request.user is equals to user. This is what our decorator. So if you come to the controller, you see over here the current user decorator. If we visit it, you see over here it's trying to access the request.user. The request.user is going to be set here in this guard, and the decorator would be able to access it, and also the same for the public. So over here, if it's a public route, if we go over to the decorator, we are also going to see the same thing that is going on here. So here is being set to the value of true, and we go on and read it from the guard, and the controller is being able to be protected based on the rules that we set up inside the JWT Auth Guard. Okay, so this is what's going on. We have this guard, but we need to make use of it in our application, okay? Because like this is not in sync. All right, so we're going to sync it by coming into the application module, and right here in the application module, we would need the providers here, and right inside the providers, we would need to add the app guard. Okay, so this app guard is going to register it globally, which means it's going to run on every request without needing to make use of any decorator. We're going to say use class, make use of the JWT class that we just created. Cool. Now there's something else we need to do. We also need to register the JWT module. So maybe I'm going to do this just before the users module. I'm going to call JWT module like this, and then I would call .register, and then I'll set it to global true. So global true just means the JWT injectable is going to be in any module without needing to import the JWT module in each of the modules where we want to make use of it. All right, so we have set up the JWT Auth Guard. I think we are now in time to test our app controllers, our routes. Hi guys, I am so excited because this is the point where we're going to try out our endpoints, our API. So let's come into the package.json. We need to run this start dev. I'm going to open up the terminal and pnpm start column dev like this so that we can start up our API. So you can see that this folder got deleted and it's going to rebuild it. Okay, and we have an error. Let's see the error. No database connection string was found. All right, it's actually a straightforward fix. We can fix this by coming into the source folder and the main.ts. I think right at the top here, let's load the .env config. So we're going to have .env, actually not like this. We need to import .env/config. And I'm going to open up the terminal before I hit save. Let me just fix this. All right, so I'm going to open up the terminal and hit save, and the error should be gone. All right, so the error is gone and we have a new error, cannot find module bcrypt, and it's coming from the Auth Service. So let's come into the Auth, and the Auth Service, it should be bcrypt.js and not bcrypt. Sorry about that. And let's save this. And yes, our application loads up. All right. We see the API route, which we do not have for now. So if you visit this, definitely we have our nicely formatted error message. Even if you refresh, we don't have it yet. So let's come over to our Swagger API documentation. I'm going to refresh and voila, I'm going to switch to dark mode. Here we have our authentication API looking so cool. These are the different endpoints, and this is the schema for the registered DTO. We see the example name, also the example email, the example password, and same for the login DTO. We see the example email and the example password. Let's test things out. Let's start by testing the login route, even though we haven't created an account here. So I'm going to hit on this, try it out at the top right, and I'm going to provide the email. Remember, the email you should provide is the one you use to create your Resend account, else it's not going to work in development. So I'm going to pass bright@gmail.com, which is my own Gmail that I used to sign up, and I'll leave the default password here, and then I'm going to execute. All right, so let me hit execute, and it's loading up. Definitely we should see an error, and we do get an error, unauthorized, and we see the error body also nicely formatted as well, and the response headers. We don't see any logs here. Okay, so now we're going to try to create an account. Okay, so I'm going to clear this, and let me scroll over to the top here. I'm also going to cancel, and then I would collapse this. All right, so let's try to register. So the register route is just right at the top here, register a new user. I'm going to hit on try it out over there and provide my name. I'll go with code with lari for the name. And the email is also going to be my email address here. Okay, just like this, @gmail.com. And I'll also leave the default password. So I'm going to execute this now, and we should get, the email, coming. So here we have registration successful. Please check your email to verify your account. And definitely, guys, I got the email arrived. So let me open up the email on this tab over here. Just give me a moment. Let me open this up, and here it is. So welcome, please verify your email. Now we see the link over there, the verify email link. And if you see at the bottom left, you can see it has this token in it, and it's going to send a GET request. So click on it, and we should get success if we have done everything correctly. And here we see success and the message email verified successfully. You are now logged in. We see all these details over here. Now, if we come back to the application and let's say we want to load up our Neon database, so the studio. So let's come right into the package.json. And here we have the command db studio. I'm just going to run this script. And now it's going to give it a moment for it to load up. Yeah, so that's the local preview. I'm going to click on this to open it up on the browser tab here. And so it's taking some time. Just give it a moment, please. And we should be able to inspect you see over there, we already have one user. And this is the user that just got created. It's verified, it's true because we have verified our email and everything works cool. All right, I'm super excited. We still have more endpoints to test out. So let's continue testing out our API that we've built. Okay, so we're going to continue, we're going to continue more tests. I think we should test the login flow, which was failing previously. So here, let's hit on try it out. Oops, and let's just execute. Our credentials are already there. Okay, so I'm going to give this a moment and voila, we are successful. So we have, we get the access token, which is cool. And then we also get the user object with the ID, the email, the name, and also the role. So this is pretty working fine. We're going to need the access token in a moment so we can test a protected route. So we can just copy this and yeah, so let's try to the me route. Okay, so where do we have it? So the me route, so over here. We can try it out, but we need to set the headers, So for that, we can click on this authorize that we are saying. Oops, maybe I clicked once too many. Yeah. So for the value, we have the bearer token. So we can just add some false token here. So anything for the token, and then we're going to authorize. And this is how we can just add the token here. And then I'm going to close this model. So I'm going to try this with the first fake token and let's see what gets returned. So hit on try it out and then execute the me route here. And then we see unauthenticated, the request body, and all of these. So now I'm going to log out and provide the real token value here and then authorize. So now let's try it out again. I'm going to hit on execute, give this a moment. And now you see we get our response, which has the user ID, the name, the role, is verified, it's true, and everything is working fine. Okay, so we still have more routes to test. We haven't tested the login and also I think the refresh route. So let's continue doing more tests. We're going to test the refresh token route. Okay, let's see if we get back the access token response. And I'm going to just go over to the try it out section and then I'm going to execute. All right, so let's give this a couple of moments and you see we get the access token back as the response. So our endpoint looks to be, working as expected. And then we can also definitely test the logout route. So here I'm going to try this out and let's see. Just like this, we can go on to send this post request. It doesn't require any body. And you see, successful log hour successfully. Okay, so there's a typo there. Maybe you spotted this earlier. I'm going to copy this and come over to the IDE and just search here. So this should be from the Auth Service and then log out successfully and save this. All right, so I think that's pretty much it for testing out our API endpoint. I don't know if we are missing or any tests. I don't think we're missing out any tests. All right, so we're going to come back and then we're going to see how we can walk through the reset password flow next. All right, so let's create, let's go on and create this service. So in the user service, we need a new method, which is going to be find by reset token. So just after the find by verification token, let's have this async find by reset token, which is going to take in the token of type string. And then we also need to query the DB. We're going to return that db.query. We want to query the users table so that we can find first like this where, and then we have equals the users.verification token. Oops, users.verification token is equals to the token here. So I'm going to format this real quick, and then we're going to create the DTO. So this is going to be right inside the auth, and then we're going to create a new file inside the DTO folder, which is going to be the forgot password.dto.ts. Let's bring in the imports. We're going to bring in his email, which will come in from class validator. And then we also need to bring in API property, which will come in from at NestJS/swagger. Okay, so let's have the class, export class, the reset password DTO like this. And then it's going to have the at API property. And then also we're going to have at a string. We're going to import it from class validator. We're also going to have at is not email. So it's not email, not empty, sorry. And then we're also going to have the token. So the token, which is of type string. And then for the password, we're going to have at API property and pass the min length of 8. And then also is string at min length and also pass 8. And now we're going to have the password, which is of type string. Now we can format real quick, and let's not forget to add exclamation mark here. Get rid of this and add our exclamations in the token as well as the password. Now let's add the method to the Auth Service. So inside the Auth Service, we're going to start with the forgot password. I think I'm just going to create this after the login method. Okay, so I think here's a good spot for it. So let's have async forgot password. It's going to get called with the email, which is of type string. Now we're going to find the user. We're going to say const user is going to be equal to await this.userService.find by email, and then we'll pass the email. Now, if we are not able to find the user, we are always going to return sources, which is actually intentional, and it's going to prevent us from what's called email enumeration attacks, where an attacker can try different emails to discover which one is actually registered in our system. So we'll say if there is no user, we want to return this object where we're going to have this message that's going to say that it's all good. If an account with this email exists, a recent link has been sent. Okay, I'm going to format, and then let's have the reset token. So we're going to come here, say const reset token is going to be equal to crypto.randombytes32 to string hex. So we want to go on and create the reset token and also the expiry, so we can update the user service. And then when the reset password is called, we are going to retrieve this token. Okay, so let's also have the reset token expires at, which is going to expire within 1 hour. So it's going to be a new date, and we'll call date.now, and then plus 60 multiplied by 60 by 60 and by 1000. So it's going to expire 1 hour. Okay, so let's update the user. So we're going to say const await this.userService.update, and we're going to update the user with this ID and pass the data, which is the reset token, as well as the reset token expires at. Then we're going to forward the email to the user. So once they click on the email, we are going to retrieve the token from the email. Okay, so we're going to say this.emailService.send password reset email. We're going to pass the user.email and also the reset token. So the token we are forwarding to the email. Now let me add void here. I'm just going to let the IDE fix this. Add void here, and let me fix these errors here. Now we can go on to return. So here we're going to return this object, which is going to have this message property. If an account with that email exists, they'll say a reset link has been sent. Okay, so we're going to then have the reset password, which is when the user clicks on the link. We're going to get the token and the new password. So the user has clicked on the link this time around. So reset password, we're going to get the token, and the token is of type string. And we also have the new password like this, which is of type string. So let's get the user. So we're going to say const user is going to be equal to await this.userService. And now we're going to find by reset token, which is going to be the token here. And then we check if there is no user. or if there is no user.reset token, they want to throw a new bad reception invalid reset token. Okay, just like this, invalid reset token. But now we're going to check if the token has expired again. So if the user that we're retrieving, so if their reset token expires at, so if they have it and the user.reset token expires at is less than the new date, like this, they want to throw a new bad request exception, which is going to say reset token has expired. Please find a new, or please request a new one. Oops, like this. Please request a new one. Now, if everything is good, let's have the password. So the password hash is going to be await bcrypt.hash a new password. So we want to save the new password now, but we need to save the hash, okay? So we want to pass in the new password here and the salt rounds of 12. So let's have 12 here. Okay, so let's go and save the new password, and we also want to clear the reset password. So clearing the token means that even if it gets reused, even if someone intercepts the email, it's not going to be of any use, okay? So we're going to await this.userservice.update. We want to update the user.id and pass in the password hash, the token request, the reset token is going to be null, and then the token reset token expires at is going to be null. And let's return this message here that reset or password reset successful. The password reset successfully. You can now log in. So we're not going to automatically log the user in as we did once they confirmed their email. So let me format this. Okay, so now we have created the service. We are going to call this service inside the authentication controller, which is going to give us the ability, or give the user the ability to reset their passwords. Okay guys, so I noticed we had an error from the DTO we created last time. So if we come right into this DTO folder, we should rename this to reset password DTO, not forgot password. And if we come into it, you would see we have the token as well as the password. So this is when the user has, gotten the password reset. We're going to create another one for the forgot password DTO. Just like this, .dto.ts, and let's bring in the import. So we're going to import is email, which is coming from class validator. Class validator, and then we also need the API property, which is coming from @NestJS Swagger. So let's export the class. I'll update that in a moment. Forgot password DTO, and then we're going to have that API property. So at API property, and give the example at john@example.com. So this is the point where the user just says, hey, I want to reset my password. They give us their email, and then we're going to send them the token and the link to reset their password. So here we're going to have his email like this, and then we'll have email, which is of type string. So let me fix this typo I have over here. This is meant to be class, and I'm going to fix the linting errors and also add the exclamation mark to email. And then I'll close all these tabs that we have open. Now we're going to create the endpoints in the authentication controller. So I think I'm going to create this just after the me route. So somewhere here, I'm going to have this post here. And then /API/auth/forgot password. Forgot password. Now we're going to make it a public route, and then at post, so /forgot password. So this is the path, forgot password, and then the HTTP code, we're going to map it to http status.ok. So this is the password reset flow. So they'll give us the email, and then we're going to send them the token, and then they can also reset the password. Okay, so here we'll just add the summary: reset a password, request a password, reset email. So this is where we send them the email. So we're going to have the async forgot password method, forgot password, and then at the body, the DTO, which is going to be of type the forgot password DTO, like this. And then we're going to return this.auth service.forgot password. So the auth service that we created, we call the forgot password, and we're passing the DTO.email. So we need the same now for reset password. So we're going to have this comment post and then /API/auth/reset password like this, and then it's going to be a public route. Let's add our public here, and then we are going to have the HTTP status code, which is going to be the HTTP status.ok, and then at API operation. So at API operation, we are going to have the summary, which is going to say reset password using token from, using token from email. And then let's have async reset password. We're going to have at body like this, and then the DTO request password DTO like this. And then we're going to return this.auth service.reset password, and then the DTO.token, and so the password, the DTO.password like this. Okay, so let me format everything we have here. And now we have created the 2 endpoints, and we have also created the services. Now we're going to go on to test these endpoints. Hi guys, before we go on to test it, we just need to mark this with our public decorator, and that's the only change that we needed to do. So now we can go on and test out the endpoints. Okay guys, so let's test out the 2 new endpoints. I have the terminal window opened because I also want to open up the DB Studio, so the Drizzle Studio. So I would say pm start dev so that I can start our development server, and then I'm going to run, I think I have a typo. This should be pnpm start dev like this. And then over here, I'm going to say pnpm db studio. Okay, so let's also execute this. And now we have the Drizzle Studio up and running, and we also have this up and running. All right, so let's start with the auth. Remember, we need to first of all go on to request the password reset. So we need to call this forgot password endpoint, and we need to call it with the email address that we used to register. Okay, so I'm going to hit on try it out here, and I'm going to provide my email address. So it has to be the email address you used to register, even if you use the wrong email. So I'm just going to use the wrong email here and execute. You would still get 200. So you see, we're still getting 200. Even accounts with that email exists. A recent link has been set, which is the behavior that we expect. So users are not going on to guess accounts that we have in our application. But now I'm going to try it out with a real email. So please, again, it has to be the email that you used to create your Resend account. And then I'm going to execute this. So now this time around, we're still going to get this 200. Even account with that email exists. A recent link has been set, and all of these. Okay, so now I'm going to give this a moment, and the email just arrived. So I'm going to open up the email that arrived here. And here's the email that arrived 0 minutes ago. And here we have the reset password link. So you can see over here, but it's not a get request. So we cannot just go on and send this. It has to be a post request that gets called with a token. So what happens is I'm going to copy this. So copy link address. And let's come back to Swagger. This time around, we're going to come over to the forgot password. So the reset password link over here, or the reset password flow, because now this is going to need the token as well as the password. So I'm going to also try it out here, and I'm going to paste everything that we got. So I'm just going to drop all of these here. So this is the actual token here, and I'm going to get rid of this like this. Now, if we confirm the user account in Drizzle Studio, so we can just refresh this, you can see we already see the reset token here. So let's give this a moment. And let me just double check. Yep, it's up and running. Okay, so now we have the users table, and if you see the reset token over here, you can see the reset token EEA11, and if we come back here, you see EEA11. So that's the user reset token, and this is the token that we are going to try to retrieve from the database. And let's say I want to set this to be my password, and if we set a wrong token, so I'll just add AAA here and execute, and I'm going to try this out with the wrong token. We get this 400 error, okay, because we are sending an invalid reset token. So let me get rid of this AAA that I added here. So here, now I'm going to execute this again, and this time around you should see Okay, so we still get 400. So let's come back to our authentication controller. And this is the reset password endpoint, and it's calling the reset password with the token and the password. So let's come right in here. And in the auth service, we are finding the user by reset token. So we are most likely coming into this point. So maybe it's not able to. So we're getting invalid reset token. So let's take a look at this find by reset token method. And here db.query.find verification token. No. Remember over here in Drizzle Studio, we are trying to look for the reset token and not for the verification token. Okay, so the verification token returns null, and that's why. So this looks for the verification token. This looks for the reset token. So sorry about the typo that we had over there. And once our application reboots this time around, if we execute this with the correct token, you would see the password. The user would have the password reset successfully, and you see password reset successful. You can now log in. So the password we did change it to is 128. And what's going to happen here, let me try to log in. So let's look for the login route. So this, and let's try to log in with the old password. So here we're going to hit on try it out, and I'm going to provide my email. So bright@gmail.com. Oops, we already have .com. And this is the old email. So now I'm going to execute this, and we should see unauthorized, invalid email or password. Now let's try it out with the new password that we have, and if we execute, we should see login successful. So you see login successful, and then we get the credential. Okay, so now we're going to transition into creating the tags and also admin roles in our application, and for that we need another decorator. So let's come into our decorators and create the roles.decorator.ts file here. So we need one new decorator here, and let's import set metadata from @NestJS/common, and then we're going to export type role, which is going to be equal to user or admin. So if you have other roles, you would want to attach them here. So let's have the roles key. We're going to export const roles key, which is going to be equal to roles, and this roles key is the metadata that the roles guard is going to be looking for. And then we can export const rows, which is going to be equal to this function that is going to take the rows, which is of type role array. And then we want to return set metadata, which is going to take in the, set metadata. It's going to take in the rows key and also rows. Remember, rows key is what the rows guard is going to be looking for. So let's fix this. And now we are going to create the guards. Okay, so that's going to be right inside the command folder. Yes, so that's going to be inside the command folder. Let's come into the command, and where we have guards. So let's create the roles.guard.ts, and then let's bring in the imports. Let's import injectable. All of these will coming from @NestJS common. So that's injectable. And also let's bring in can activate. Let's also bring in the execution context and also forbidding exception. We also need the reflector, which we can use to read metadata. So reflector like this, and then the rows key, and also the type of role, which will coming from our roles decorator. So let's have the class, which will start with the @injectable. And then we can export class. The roles guard is going to implement can activate like this, and then let's initialize the constructor private reflector here, which is equals to reflector, just like this. Okay, so let's have the can activate. I'm going to bring it in and remove the observable and also the promise boolean from here. And also just format this real quick. Yeah, so we're in order. Let's continue. And here we're going to try to read the required rows from the @rows decorator. And if no rows are set, that means that route actually doesn't require any specific row. So that's what we're going to map out here. We're going to say const required rows. And required rows is going to be this.reflector, and then we'll call get all and override like this. And we're going to say it's a generic type so that we can pass the row, which is this role array here. And then the target, which we're going to have here, is the role, and then we're going to have the target to be the context.get handler and also context.get class. Okay, so let's have this condition that we're going to check over here. So if no required rows or the required rows.length is equal to 0, then we're going to return true, which means if no rows are set, this route does not require a specific row. So let's format this real quick. And then the Auth Guard should at this point be attached to the request.user, because in the app module, we're going to have the JWT module imported first before we import this rows module, because we want to get access to the user. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to do. So we're going to say const user. So we're going to destructure user is going to be equal to the context.switch to HTTP and then .get request like this. And here let's destructure user. So TypeScript might not know. So here we're going to tell TypeScript that this is going to be of type request with user. So request should come in from express, and then this request and this user, which is going to be of type user, which will come in from our DB schema. So here I'm going to format this to be sure we are still in check. Yes, we are. We're going to now then check if has row. So here has row is going to be equal to required rows.includes user.row. So a role is included. We want to check if the required role, if the user has a required role, and if not, so if the user doesn't have the role, then we're going to throw a new forbidden exception because the user is trying to visit an endpoint that they shouldn't visit. We can say you do not have permission to access this resource, and let's not forget to return true so that the request can continue. So we're going to return true here. So let's fix the linting errors that we have. You do not, let me also fix this. Okay, so I'm also going to get rid of this observable. Cool. So that's not all. Now we need to make sure we register this guard inside the app module, and it has to be in the providers just after the JWT Auth Guard, because the JWT Auth Guard is going to inject the request user. So I'll duplicate this, and I'm gonna bring in the rows guard here like this. And does it look like we're missing anything? Yeah, we need to add a comma here just like this and format this properly. Okay, so now we can get ready to work on our admin resources and also the tax resource. Okay guys, so far during the course we have been manually creating the different files, and we actually have a better way, or maybe an easier way of doing this via the NestJS CLI. So the NestJS CLI is going to help us create the boilerplate code and also link them up to their right modules and also update, let's say, the providers array and stuff like that. So let's see how it works. I'm going to just open up the terminal now, and then I'll shut it and clear up the terminal. And then we can say nest generate to generate a module. So module and the name of the module, in this case tax. So you can actually execute like this, or you can change module to MO, which is like a shortcut. And once you execute, you're going to see it's going to do two things. The first thing that's going to happen, the module is going to get generated. If we check the source folder, we have the tax module, and this is it. And also the application module, you see, it got updated. If we come here, we're going to see, I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. So we can see the tax module there. Now let's also generate a controller. We can say nest G. We don't have to type generate in full. So nest G like this, and then we're going to say controller, or you can say also CO like this for controller, and then tax, and then dash no spec. No spec means we do not need the testing files. Okay, so once you execute this, if we check, now we're going to see we have this controller boilerplate, and the module here is also updated with the controller in the controllers array over here, as you can see. So that's all nice. Let's also generate the service. So we're going to say nest G for generate, and then S for service. So you can easily type it out, or you can say S, and then tax, and also dash no spec, because we don't need the test files. And then let's give this a moment. We see the service got generated, and also the tax module got updated, the providers array. Now let's do the same for the admin. I'm going to clear this, and we're going to say nest G mo admin. So nest generate module, the admin module. And here we have the admin module, and we also have the app module updated. Okay, so let's also say nestg controller and admin dash no spec to generate the admin controller. So now it's going to get generated, and also we are going to have the admin module updated. All right, so now we have the different boilerplates that we need, and we can get started by creating the tax DTO. Okay, so you know the drill. Now we're going to go on to create the tax DTO. So right inside the tax here, we're going to create the new file, which is going to be the DTO, and then we're going to have the create-tax.dto.ts. All right, so let me bring in these imports in here like this, and we also need to import API property because that's not all. So here, let's import API property, which will come in from at NestJS/swagger. And now we're going to export the class create-tax.dto. Then we're going to have that API property with the example. So you want to create a tax. A tax will definitely have a title. You can say something like build authentication system. You can imagine this as your to-do title. And then we're going to have a string, and it's not empty because a title is required. And here we're going to have the title. Don't forget your exclamation mark, semicolon, string like this. And then for the description, we're going to have this example that says something like implement JWT with refresh token. Anything of your choice. This is your to-do description, and it's not going to be required. So we're going to see something new now. We're going to say comma required is going to be equal to false. And then we're going to have a string, and also is optional. So this is optional is for our controller. The required false we had initially was for Swagger. Okay, so now we have all of this. Let me format this real quick, and then we can go into the tax service. All right, we have this error we're not making use of is enum, so let me get rid of it here and save. Okay, so let's create the tax service, and we already have the boilerplate here. So let's come in here and bring in the imports. We need to bring in the not found exception, and also the forbidden exception like this. And we also need to bring in DB, so our database from DB, and also our tax schema. And then let's bring in the checkers, so the equals and also and, which will come in from Drizzle ORM, and is going to allow us to combine different equals, okay? And then we want to import our create tax DTO type. Okay, so in here, let's have our methods. We're going to have this async find all for user. So the idea is this is going to find many, so all the tags that belong to a specific user. Then we need the user ID, which is a string, and we're going to return the db.query.tags. I want to find many. Okay, so this is going to return a list. We want to find all the tags where the tags.user_id is going to be equal to the user ID. So we're going to say where equals tags.user_id, so tags is going to be equal to user.id, just like this. And then we're going to have the next one, which is create. So async create. To create a tag, so we need the user ID, and we also need the DTO, which is going to be of type the create tags DTO here. So create tags DTO. And now we're going to destructure the tags from here and await the db.insert. So db.insert tags. So in case you're wondering, the user ID is always going to come from the JWT, never from the request body. We never want to trust the ID coming from the request body, okay? And here, the insert, we're going to have the values. So we're going to say dot values, and then we want to spread all the values from the DTO and then the user ID, and we want to return the tags. Okay, so dot returning and return tags. All right, so let's have update. So async update. To update the tags, we need the ID of the tag. So the ID is going to be of type string. We also need the user ID, which is of type string, and then we need data. This data is going to be of partial type, so any type from any field from the create tags DTO that we have right up here. And then we're going to say const tags here like this is going to be equal to await db.query.tags.find first, and then I want to find the tags where the tags.id is going to be equal to the ID. So we want to first of all check if this tags is in our database. So let me fix this here. So tags.id equals to ID, and if we do not find any tags for some reason, the user is trying to update the tags we do not have, we want to throw a not found exception. So throw new not found exception that says the tax is not found. Then we also want to check for ownership. We can do that by saying if the tax.userid is not equal to the user ID that this function is going to get. So we found the tax. Let's confirm ownership of that tax so that users can only edit their own tax. In that case, we're going to throw a forbidden exception, something that's going to say you do not own this tax. So you do not own this tax like this. All right, we have so many errors. Let me quickly format this. And we have 2 errors here, which we're going to come back to in a moment. Okay, so let's continue for now. We're going to have the updated tax here. It's going to be called await db.update. So we want to call this on the tax table. So tax. And then .set. We want to set, we'll spread out the data in an object and also the updated at, which is going to be equal to new date like this. And then we're going to say where, so here, and we're going to make use of the AND operator here. So we want to check the equals, the tax.id is going to be equal to ID, and where the tax.userid is going to be equal to the user ID. So remember, ID as well as user ID is going to be passed over to this service from the controller, and then the user ID like this. So if everything is fine and good, we're going to have .returning, and then we're going to return the updated tax here. So return updated like this and updated here. All right, so let me fix this error that we have over here real quick. Okay, so we have also for delete, async delete, we're going to require the ID of the tax, which is a string, and also the user ID, which is a string like this. Okay, so let me remove this here. All right, so here let's say const tax. We also want to find the tax again. Going to await db.query.tax.find first, and then where the .query.tax.find first, where equals tax.id and ID. Normally we are checking this, so you might have a private property here that is going to always fetch the tax, so you don't have to repeat this query everywhere. But then if we do not have the tax, we're going to also throw this new not found exception, which is going to say tax not found. So I'll just copy this and paste this here. And also I'm going to copy the check over there because it's pretty much the same. So this check over here where we're comparing the tax.userid to the user ID, just like this. So if everything is fine and good, we want to then call our db.delete. I want to pass the tax. And then we can say where equals the tax.id is going to be equal to ID. And we're going to return the message that says tax deleted successfully. Tax deleted successfully. Okay, so let me fix these errors that we have over here. Let's start with the linting error. I'm going to fix this and let's scroll to the top. Let's see all the errors that we have. So this tax over here shouldn't be in an array, it's a tax object. So we're going to remove it from there, and that fixes it. And this other tax we have here should be tax, not tax. Okay. So now we fix the error that we have. We're going to continue by creating the tax controller, and this tax controller is then going to call these services that we have created here. Okay, so we're going to wrap up the tax by creating the controller. So right here, let's have the imports. We're going to import get. We're also going to import post, also patch, delete. We also need body and param decorator. And then let's bring in all of these also coming from NestJS Swagger. So I'm going to format this real quick. And I'm going to import API tags, also API operation, bring in the API bearer auth as well. Then let's bring in our tax service, which will come in from tax.service. And then we also need the create tax DTO, which will come in from our create tax DTO. We also need our current user decorator and the type user, which will come in from our DB schema. Now right here, we're going to have the API tags for Swagger documentation. So here we're going to have at API tags, I want to have tags here. And we also need the API bearer auth so that we can have our auth token for testing. We're going to initialize the tag service in the constructor. So we're going to say private tag service is equals to tag service like this. And let's have the different endpoints. We're going to start off by creating the get endpoint, and then the at API operation, which is going to have API operation, which is going to have this summary get all tags for current user. And we're going to say find all. Find all is the method, and we're going to extract the current user, making use of our current user decorator. Remember, we said we only want to get the user ID from the JWT and not from the request body. And here we're going to return this.tagService. So this.tagService.create, I want to pass in the user ID as well as the DTO here. Okay, I think we have an error. This should not be create. This should be find all for users. So let me update it real quick, and we don't need the DTO here as well. Okay, so the next one is going to be post. So at post, we're going to have the at API operation, which is going to have the summary. Create a new tags. So create a new tags like this. And then we're going to have create, which is the method, and then at current user. We need to have access to the user. So at current user, here user is going to be of type user, and then also at body, where we would have the DTO, which is the create tags DTO, and then we're going to return this dot tag service dot create, and now we're going to pass in the user ID and also the DTO. All right, so we need the same for patch. So let's have at patch endpoint, and now we're going to have the dynamic ID. So at patch dynamic ID, we're going to specify it like this. So we need the ID of the tags, and then we're going to have the at API operation for Swagger docs real quick. API operation, which is just going to say update a tags in the summary here. Then we're going to have the method we're going to call update. So this update method of this class is going to take in the following parameters. Yeah, oops, let me type it out real quick. So the current user, so we're going to have at current user, which is going to be user like this of type user. And also to extract the param, we're going to make it of the at param decorator, and the name here is going to be ID. So that's the name we're expecting, and now we're going to say ID is going to be of type string. And then we have at body, which gives us access to the DTO, and this is going to be a partial type for the create tags DTO. Okay, so I'm going to format this real quick. It's becoming difficult to read. And then we can have the last one for, let's have the body here. So I'm going to return this.tagService.update. So this.tagService.update. We need to pass in 3 parameters, which is the ID, the user.id, as well as the DTO. Okay, so updates here. Let me fix this. All right. I'm going to say at delete. Also, we need the ID of the tags. And then we're also going to have at API operation. The summary is going to be delete a tags. And let's have a remove method of this class. So remove and at current user. Current user like this. We're going to have user. User is going to be of type user. And then also at param, where we're going to have the ID, which is ID like this, and then of type string. All right, so we're just going to return this. So this dot tag service dot delete, where we're going to pass the ID, which is the ID of the tags, and then the user ID here. All right, let me format this real quick. And why do we still have an error here? Oh, update. So we have a typo in the service. Let me quickly convert to the service and fix it, which is going to fix the error that we have in the controller. Okay, so we have all of these. We have these 4 endpoints. So we have the delete endpoint over here. We also have the patch endpoint, the post endpoint, and the get endpoint. let's test all these endpoints out. Alright guys, let's have the admin controller. So remember, we already have the admin module set up. So now we're going to work on the admin controller. Let's start as always with our imports. We're going to import the get decorator, the delete, and also the param decorator. And we also need to bring in the API tags from NestJS/Swagger. So let's import the API tags and also the API operation and also the API bearer auth. Then we need the user service. So we're going to import the user service from users.service as well as the roles. So let's import the roles. This role is going to come in from our decorator. So remember, we did set up the roles. Now here, let's add more tags here. So at API tags, we're going to have the admin. And then this is also going to need the API bearer auth. So at API bearer auth, and most importantly, oops, this is not a string, we need at rows decorator here. So in here, we're going to pass what row? This is going to be admin role, okay? So what this means is that every route that is going to be in this controller is going to be require the role to be admin. So we should have that in mind. Okay, so let's have the constructor so that we can initialize the user service, because the admin is just more or less going to have user privilege in this API. So user service is going to be equal to user service from up here like this. And here we're going to have the get request. So admin should be able to get all the users. So this is the endpoint users with lowercase u. And we're going to have the API operation. Let's say something like, let's give it a summary. That's going to be something like list all users admin only. So list all users admin only. Now we're going to have the method, which is we're going to call it, let's say, find all, which is pretty much straightforward. It's going to return this.userService. Oops. So this.userService.find all, just like this. We need the same for delete. So our delete is going to be /users/delete. So /admin/users and then the ID of the user. And then we're going to have the at API operation, which is going to give this summary of, let's say, delete a user, admin only. You know, that kind of summary is going to be fine. Delete a user, admin only, like this. And let's have remove. Remove here is going to have the at param decorator, which is going to have the ID. And here we're going to say ID is going to be equal to string. And we can return this.userService.delete, and we pass the ID. All right, so let me format everything we have here, and we have everything set up for the admin. So the admin, it should be able to get all the users and also delete a specific user within this application. All right, so we're going to be testing out these methods that we have for getting and also for delete. Yeah, so let's go on and test it here, and you can see the role has to be the admin role. Okay, so I'm also going to open up two terminals here. So this is going to be pnpm start dev, which is going to start up our development server, and then this is going to be pnpm db. I think that's pnpm db starts. Let me confirm from the package JSON. This is pnpm db, yeah, db studio. All right, so we have an error here, and let's inspect, and that's a dependency injection error. NestJS cannot resolve dependencies of the admin controller. Okay, so make sure you have the user service. Oh, okay, so it's the admin module. Okay, so what's going on here? If we take a look at the source admin, this admin module here, if we come into the controller, you see we are injecting the user service inside the admin controller, but the admin module over here doesn't know where to find the service. So what we need to do, let's make sure that in the users module that we're actually exporting the user service. So over here in users, in the users module, yes, we're exporting the user service. Now this alone isn't going to be enough, but we have to export it so that we can import the users module inside the admin module. So now with the users module imported inside the admin module, this service is going to be exported and it can be injected, right inside the admin controller. Okay, so let's just come here in the imports array. We need to bring in the users module. So the users module like this, and this should solve everything that we have, the errors that we have over here. And it does. Okay, so we have the tax route. So if we come over here, right inside the tax, we have the tax controller and we have this 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's test things out. Maybe we can start with the create, and once we're able to test out the create, then we can also test out others like getting and stuff like that. Okay, so let's come over to Swagger here, and I'm going to collapse all of these. And let's leave off and let's look for where we have tax. So let me refresh this a moment. Yeah, so this is tax and this is also the admin. I'm also going to collapse this, and these are the different schemas here. So create tax DTO is going to need the title as well as the description, and then we can also get an example here, like to create tax post. And this is going to have the title and an optional description. And if we hit on try it out now, we can give it a title of subscribe to code with Larry, and the description is going to be yes, I have. All right, so hopefully you have, and let's continue. We are going to hit execute. Does it pass? So let's see. No access token provided. Let's try again and see. That was really fast. Oh, no access token provided. All right, so let's authenticate. Let's come into the auth and write an auth. Where do we have login? Let's just try to authenticate ourselves. I'm going to hit on try it out and provide my bright@laribray2@gmail.com. I remember I changed the password last time out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to execute, give this a moment, and we should get our response with our access token. So I'm going to copy this access token. So right click, copy, and then we're going to make use of it. So I can collapse this back again. And now, does it work out of the box? No, it doesn't. So we need to come over to authorize. And here in authorize, let's put our bearer token here and authorize like this. Okay, so now we can close this up. And if we execute this time around, we should have success. And yes, we do. So we have the response body with the ID, the title, the description. The status should no longer be to do, because at this point you should have, subscribed to the channel. And we have the created that, the updated that, the user ID, and all of these. So now let's just double check. If we come over to the tax, give this a refresh, we should see we should have one tax over here. So give it a moment. I was, kind of, yeah. So this is the tax and this is that to do. And I'm just going to say this is done because, maybe you have subscribed at this point. Okay, so let's continue. And the next thing we're going to do is to get all the tags. Okay, so let's try to get all the tags that we have in the application. So /API/tags, the get. And over here, we're going to hit try it out. I don't see any description here, but let's send it. And now we should get a list of different tags. So here's it. This is the tags that we just created, and the status is done because we updated it in Drizzle. All right, so let's continue. And now let's also test out the update tags. So we need the tax ID. So let me grab this ID, which is the tax ID, just like this. I'm going to copy this. And to update the tax right here in patch, it needs the ID. So I'll hit try it out. And the ID is going to be equal to this. And then it also needs the name and the description. And where can I fill out the name? So I see the description and I don't see where I can fill out the name. For some reason, I don't see where we can fill out the name. If we execute this, definitely it's going to be successful. Yep, because we passed the ID, but where do we have to fill in the name? Okay, for some reason I don't see it, so I guess it's a Swagger something. It doesn't know how to read the update DTO, because we have the body which is of type the create tax DTO. Okay, so but let's continue. Let's try to delete a tax. Let's test out that functionality. So this delete, it needs the ID. So I'm quickly going to get the ID from here. And let's use the ID over here. So I'm going to hit try it out, drop in the ID, and then I would say execute like this, and unauthorized. Okay, so I did refresh and I lost the state, so I have to log in again. And give me a moment to really log into the system. Oops. Just like this. And the password. So now I'm going to log in, and then I would copy the token, which is this. So I'm going to right click, copy this, authorized. I'm going to paste it in here, hit unauthorized, and exit this. And now I'm going to execute to delete the stacks, and we should see success. So we get internal server error. And what's the error? Okay, so so let's refresh this. Oops, not this. Let's refresh the studio to be sure it's still there, and give this a moment. I'm just going to drag this over here. Okay, so we see the tags over here, and this is the tags ID that we are passing over here. So this over here, like this, we execute, and then we get internal server error, which is this. Okay, actually now it's successful, tags deleted successfully. All right, so it works. And if we come back to get all the tags, we are not going to get, we're going to get an empty array. We're going to get an empty list. So here you see, we get an empty list because we have deleted all the tags. So we are sure that, our API is working as we expect. Now let's try to get all the users. Let's test out the admin route. And the admin route should be, let me collapse this and this. Now this is the admin route. An admin should be able to get all users, and an admin should be able to add, delete a user. So here we have admin, get all users. It should fail because my role currently is user. So you see, you do not have the permission to access this resource. So let's come over to Drizzle Studio, and in the users here, let's quickly update the role. I would say the role is admin and save changes. Now I should have admin privileges in my JWT. And now if I execute this, it's going to, fetch me, and you see, this is the response. This user has been deleted, okay? So it works for the admin, and we can see the role. If you're a user, you should not be able to fetch all the users, okay? So now let's try to delete this user. So I'm going to copy this user ID, and let's test this out. I would try it out, drop in the admin over here, and then execute. Give this a moment, and we should see 200. Okay, so it worked. Okay guys, so this is the last video for this course. So I'm so excited. We are pretty much done. We just want to do some production hardening. Okay, so let's implement rate limiting in our APIs. So we're going to start or come into the application module, and right at the top here we're going to import the throttler module. So throttler module, for some reason I'm not getting auto completion, so I would have to copy and import manually right from the top. So this throttler module needs to come in from at NestJS/throttler. From at NestJS, and here is it. Let me scroll down. Okay, so we're going to call for root. We have seen for root so many times in this course now, and we're going to pass the list of configuration. So here we're going to pass this TTL of 60,000, which is the global default. So we're also going to say the limit is going to be 20. So we're going to say 20 requests per 60 seconds per IP address. So I'm going to fix this, and let me just briefly explain what's going here. So this throttler module here for root is just the same pattern as our config module for root that we've done in the application. And this is going to help us to configure the rate limiting ones globally at root level in our application. And we're going to pass in an array of throttler config. So one config here is going to define a window, and this 60,000 here we're saying this is the time window in milliseconds. So that's 60 seconds, and we are limiting it to 20. And this 20 means this is the maximum request allowed per IP address within that window. And this is actually a global default, but different routes can go on to overwrite it, which we're going to do with the authentication route in a moment. But to wrap it all up, in this providers array, we need to provide an application guard. just like the other two we have. So the app guard, and it's going to make use of the throttler guard now. So we're going to say use class, and the class is the throttler guard class, like this. So this is all we need to do. Let me fix this. Okay, let me add a comma here real quick, and then I'm going to fix the linting errors. Now I want to apply stricter limits to the authentication endpoints. Okay, we're going to do more setup in the authentication controller. So let's come into the auth, and inside the auth controller.ts file, and maybe we are going to look for the login endpoints. Yeah, so this is how you do it. You're going to have at throttle here. So at throttle, this is how you can configure it per endpoint, and you can pass a default. So the default here, we're still going to go with the default time here, and the TTL is going to be 60,000, and then the limit here is going to be 5. So we are making it more strict here for the login. The limit in the overall application is 20, but for login is 5. And let's also do the same for the forgot password. So I'm going to copy this, and if we find the forgot password route, should be somewhere down. Yeah, so this is it, and I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to limit this also, okay, to 3 this time around. Okay, just to provide or just to prevent spam abuse. So guys, this is everything. Thank you so much for being with me throughout this course, and if you found it interesting, do not forget to give me a follow. I await your questions if you have any. Until then, I'll see you next time.